Picture this. A man so powerful that silence falls like a guillotine blade the moment he enters a room. Duke Roderic Vayne doesn't just rule Blackthorn Vale, he owns every breath taken within its borders. But tonight, in the stone-cold heart of Vanehold Castle, that absolute power is about to meet its first real test. Not from armies or assassins, but from something far more dangerous. A woman who refuses to disappear. Stick around until the end, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about dominance and desire. And hey, if you're hooked already, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. The winter wind cut through Blackthorn Vale like a blade through silk, merciless and precise. Inside Vanehold Castle, the cold was different. It wasn't the weather, it was him. Duke Roderic Vayne stood at the eastern tower window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the frozen landscape spread beneath him like a conquered kingdom. Which it was. Every snow-covered field, every stone cottage, every breath of smoke rising from chimneys. His. Absolute. Unquestioned. Behind him, the grand hall stretched out in oppressive silence. Servants moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old carpets. They'd learned long ago not to make noise around the Duke. Noise implied presence. Presence invited attention. Attention from Roderic Vayne was rarely pleasant. He was a fortress of the man. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that suggested violence was always an option, never off the table. His face could have been carved from the same granite that formed the castle walls. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of winter storms. Gray, cold, calculating. Those eyes had watched men beg, had watched them break, had never once softened. 34 years old, and he'd been Duke for 12 of them. 12 years of iron rule. 12 years of converting his father's crumbling legacy into an empire of control. The previous Duke had been weak, sentimental, beloved. Roderic was none of those things. When he took power at 22, fresh from military campaigns in the Northern Territories, he'd purged the council of every soft-hearted fool who'd enabled his father's failures. 3 advisors had resigned within the first month. 2 had been exiled. 1 had simply disappeared. The nobility learned quickly. Cross the Duke, lose everything. Challenge the Duke, lose more than everything. He didn't make threats. He made examples. Now, standing in his tower, Roderic felt the familiar weight of absolute authority settling over his shoulders like a cloak. Comfortable. Deserved. Lonely as fuck, but that was the price. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. He didn't turn around. Didn't need to. Come in. The door opened with a whisper of hinges that had been oiled precisely because squeaking hinges irritated him, and irritating the Duke was a bad career move. Your Grace? The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne, his chancellor. Mid-50s, razor-sharp mind, survival instincts of a cornered rat. He'd lasted 8 years in Roderic's service by being competent and knowing when to shut up. The Lady Seraphine has arrived. Roderic's jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough. Of course she had. The alliance. The marriage. The political necessity that had been negotiated over 6 months of tedious correspondence and even more tedious diplomatic dinners. Lord Ardent's daughter in exchange for military protection and trade routes. A transaction. Nothing more. He'd seen her portrait once. Pale skin, dark hair, delicate features arranged in that studied pleasantness. Wealthy daughters were trained to display. Pretty enough. Irrelevant enough. She'd be installed in the Western Wing, make appearances at necessary functions, produce heirs when required, and otherwise cease to exist in any meaningful way. That was the deal. That was always the deal. Where is she? The blue drawing room, Your Grace, awaiting your presence. Tell her I'll meet her at dinner. Your Grace, she's traveled 3 days in harsh weather. Protocol suggests, I don't care what protocol suggests. Dinner. Dismissed. Marcus hesitated. A fraction of a second. Barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know Roderic, but Roderic knew everyone's tells. Knew every micro-expression, every subtle shift that indicated disagreement, fear, rebellion. Something else, Chancellor? No, Your Grace. Good. The door closed. Silence returned. Roderic remained at the window. He didn't want to meet her yet. Didn't want to see whatever hope or fear or expectation lived in her eyes. Didn't want to pretend this was anything other than what it was. A strategic acquisition. She'd learn soon enough. They all did. Hope died quickly in Vanehold. Better to let it die now, before she invested in delusions. The thing about power, true power, was that it required distance. His father had failed to understand that, had loved his Duchess openly, publicly, weakly, had made decisions based on emotion rather than strategy, had died young and left behind a duchy hemorrhaging influence and respect. Roderic had rebuilt it by eliminating every vulnerability, every soft edge, every point of potential exploitation. Love was the greatest vulnerability of all. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Years ago. Another life, another version of himself that he'd systematically dismantled and buried so deep that most days he could pretend she'd never existed. Elara. Even thinking the name felt like picking at a wound that had never properly healed. She'd been everything, light and laughter, and the kind of reckless joy that made you believe the world was more than calculation and consequence. She'd been his, completely, or so he'd thought, and then she'd died. Suddenly, senselessly. A fever that swept through the eastern villages and took her in 3 days. He'd been 25, about to propose, about to let himself be that kind of fool. The grief had nearly destroyed him. But destruction, he'd discovered, could be useful. You could rebuild from ashes into something harder, something that couldn't be hurt because it refused to feel. 9 years later, Elara existed as a ghost, a memory perfected by distance, a shrine in his mind to everything he'd never allow himself to want again. And now they expected him to marry some nobleman's daughter and play the role of devoted husband. Absolutely not. He'd fulfill the contract, install her in the castle, ensure she was comfortable and provided for, produce the required heirs through whatever minimal interaction that required. But he would not, allow her proximity to anything that mattered. She would be decorative, distant, irrelevant. That was mercy, really, because anyone who got close to Roderic Vayne ended up collateral damage. Better she understood that from the beginning. Moke. Lady Seraphine Ardent sat in the blue drawing room and understood exactly nothing. She understood the room was beautiful in that austere, unwelcoming way that screamed old money and older grudges. She understood her hands were freezing despite the fireplace. She understood she'd been sitting here for 90 minutes and her future husband couldn't be bothered to greet her. What she didn't understand was how she'd ended up in this particular circle of hell. Okay. That was a lie. She understood perfectly. Her father, Lord Edric Ardent, had accumulated debts the way other men accumulated bad habits, enthusiastically and without regard for consequence. The Ardent estate was bleeding money. Creditors were circling, and Duke Roderic Vayne had offered a solution: marriage to his daughter in exchange for enough financial backing to keep the Ardent name from becoming a punchline at noble gatherings, a transaction, her for solvency. Her father had presented it as an opportunity, an honor, a chance to elevate the family. Her mother had cried for 3 days. Seraphine had accepted because the alternative was watching her family's legacy crumble and knowing she could have prevented it. But sitting here in this ice-cold castle, waiting for a man who apparently viewed her arrival with the same enthusiasm as a dental appointment, she was starting to wonder if pride was worth this particular price. The door opened. She straightened automatically, smoothing her traveling dress, arranging her face into the pleasant neutrality she'd been trained to deploy since childhood. But it wasn't him. An older woman entered, gray-haired and stern-faced, carrying herself with the kind of rigid formality that suggested she'd been part of the castle's foundation since construction. Lady Seraphine. I am Mrs. Hallowell, head of household staff. His Grace sends his regrets, but will meet you at dinner. I'll show you to your chambers. Seraphine stood slowly. His regrets. How thoughtful. Your chambers are in the western wing, quite comfortable. The Duke has ensured you'll have everything you need. Everything except a husband who acknowledges my existence, apparently. Mrs. Hallowell's expression didn't change, not even a flicker. Lady Seraphine, if I may offer a word of advice, His Grace is a man of particular habits and expectations. Your comfort here will depend largely on your ability to understand and respect his preferences, which are privacy, order, and a general absence of disruption. Translation: stay out of his way, keep quiet, and pretend this is normal. Seraphine felt something cold settle in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite resignation, something in between. How very romantic. Mrs. Hallowell's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, might have been a muscle spasm. Romance is not among His Grace's priorities, my lady, But he is fair. He provides generously for those under his protection. You will want for nothing material, just everything else. She didn't say it out loud. What was the point? Instead, she followed Mrs. Hallowell through corridors that echoed with emptiness, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her very presence, up a grand staircase that belonged in a museum rather than a home, and finally to a suite of rooms that were, admittedly, stunning. High ceilings, massive windows overlooking snow-covered gardens, furniture that probably cost more than her family's annual income, a four-poster bed that could sleep 6 people comfortably, all of it utterly, devastatingly empty. "This is yours," Mrs. Hallowell said. "The Duke's chambers are in the eastern wing, separate floors. You'll rarely encounter him outside of scheduled interactions. Scheduled interactions. Like business meetings. Dinner is at 8, formal dress. His Grace expects punctuality." Of course he does. Mrs. Hallowell left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Seraphine stood in the center of her beautiful, expensive cage and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her like snow. She was 23 years old, well-educated, well-mannered, reasonably intelligent. She spoke 3 languages, played piano moderately well, could navigate social situations with the skill of a trained diplomat. None of it mattered. She'd been traded, sold, installed in a castle with a man who'd made it abundantly clear she was an obligation, not a person. The anger came then, hot and sudden, and completely useless. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to march down to wherever the hell Duke Roderic Vayne was hiding and demand he at least look her in the eyes while treating her like furniture. But she didn't, because that would be disruptive. And disruption, apparently, was the cardinal sin in Vanehold Castle. Instead, she walked to the window and stared out at the frozen landscape, at the duchy that was now supposedly hers as much as his, and made a decision. Fine. He wanted distance? He'd get distance. He wanted her to be decorative and silent and irrelevant. She'd be all of those things, right up until she wasn't. Because Seraphine Ardent had learned something important growing up in a failing noble house. Survival required adaptation. And if this was her new reality, she'd adapt, just not in the way he expected. Dinner was a masterclass in hostile silence. The dining hall was enormous, 30-foot ceilings, a table that could seat 40, crystal chandeliers throwing cold light over polished surfaces. 2 people. Roderic sat at the head of the table. Seraphine had been placed 8 feet away on his right, close enough for propriety, far enough to make conversation awkward, which was clearly the point. He'd arrived exactly at 8. She'd been waiting since 7:55 because showing up late to meet the Duke, who'd already snubbed her once, seemed like a bad tactical move. He hadn't greeted her, hadn't even looked at her directly, just sat down, nodded to the servants, and begun eating. Seraphine watched him across the expanse of mahogany and felt a strange detachment settle over her, like she was observing a play rather than living her life. He was objectively stunning. The portraits hadn't done him justice. Sharp features that belonged on classical sculptures, broad shoulders that filled out his formal coat in a way that suggested real strength rather than tailoring, hands that moved with precise control as he cut his food, and those eyes, storm gray and utterly empty of warmth. He looked like he'd been carved from ice and arrogance. She took a bite of what tasted like ash and decided to break the silence. "Thank you for the accommodations. They're lovely." He didn't look up. "You're welcome." 2 words, delivered with the enthusiasm of a man reading a tax document. "The western wing is quite spacious. Yes, I assume you chose it specifically for the distance from your own quarters." That got his attention. He looked at her then, full eye contact. The weight of it was almost physical. "I chose it because it's comfortable and provides appropriate space for the Duchess of Blackthorn Vale. If you find it insufficient, inform Mrs. Hallowell." His voice was deep, controlled, absolutely devoid of anything resembling human emotion. Seraphine met his gaze and refused to look away. "It's perfect, for a prisoner with excellent taste." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or irritation, gone too quickly to identify. "You're not a prisoner." "No? No. You're my wife. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm sitting, the main difference seems to be that prisoners usually get a trial first." His jaw tightened, barely, but she saw it. "You agreed to this marriage, Lady Seraphine. Your father signed the contract. You stood at the altar. Nobody forced you. You're right. Nobody held a knife to my throat. They just held my family's financial ruin over my head and called it a choice. Totally different. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Roderic set down his fork with deliberate care. Each movement precise, controlled. "Let me be clear," he said, voice dropping to something colder than the winter outside. "I did not ask for a wife. I do not need a wife. What I need is a stable duchy, secure alliances, and minimal disruption to the systems I've spent 12 years building. You fulfill a political requirement, nothing more. If you expected romance or companionship or whatever fantasy your novels suggested marriage entails, you've been misinformed." Seraphine felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something harder. Her last illusion, maybe. "Good to know," she said quietly. "I'd hate to waste time on unrealistic expectations." "Excellent. Then we understand each other. Perfectly. You need a decorative noblewoman to parade at functions and produce heirs. I need financial security for my family. Transaction completed. How very efficient." "Exactly." She took another bite, swallowed past the tightness in her throat. One question, though. He waited. Didn't speak. Just watched her with those empty eyes. "Do you treat everyone like furniture, or am I special?" For a moment, just a moment, something almost human crossed his face. Something that might have been pain or regret, or the ghost of whoever he used to be before he became this. Then it vanished. "I treat everyone according to their function," he said. "You'd do well to remember yours." He stood, dropped his napkin on the table. "Enjoy your meal, Lady Seraphine. I have work to attend to." He left. Just walked out. Left her sitting alone at a table built for 40, in a hall echoing with emptiness. Seraphine sat very still for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the head of the table where he'd been sitting, and took his seat. Small rebellion, petty even. But it was hers. And in Vanehold Castle, apparently, that was all she'd get. The weeks that followed established a pattern that would have been funny if it weren't so suffocating. Roderic avoided her with the dedication of a man dodging plague. He took breakfast in his study. Lunch was working meals with advisors. Dinner became a rotating schedule of council meetings, estate reviews, and convenient excuses. When they did cross paths, inevitable in a shared castle, he acknowledged her with the warmth of a bank teller. Polite, brief, absolutely meaningless. Lady Seraphine, Duke Vayne, and then nothing. The castle staff watched this dynamic, with the carefully blank expressions of people who'd seen this exact scenario play out before and knew better than to comment. Seraphine learned the rhythms of Vanehold quickly. Morning silence until 9, the Duke's office hours from 9 to noon, afternoon inspections of estate operations, evening paperwork until late. He ran the duchy like a military campaign, every hour accounted for, every decision documented, every interaction purposeful. She didn't fit anywhere in that structure, so she made her own. It started small. Conversations with servants who seemed genuinely shocked that the Duchess knew their names. Questions about the estate's operations that revealed disturbing gaps in basic care. The eastern villages hadn't seen infrastructure improvements in years. The southern farmlands were operating with outdated equipment. The schools in the outer territories were barely functional, all of it profitable enough to avoid Roderic's attention. None of it Yuxian enough to warrant his intervention. "The Duke cares about power and stability," Mrs. Hallowell explained one morning when Seraphine asked why the village schools were crumbling. "He ensures the duchy functions. Beyond that, details are delegated. To whom? Various administrators. Who report to? The Chancellor. Who tells the Duke? What the Duke needs to know. Which is numbers, profits, threats, not people." Mrs. Hallowell's expression softened just slightly. "Not people, my lady." "No." Seraphine stood in the castle's morning room, looking out at the duchy spread below, and felt something shift inside her. Fine. If Roderic Vayne cared about numbers, she'd give him numbers. If he cared about stability, she'd create it. If he wanted her to be irrelevant and invisible, she'd be neither. She started visiting the villages. Just her and a minimal guard. No announcement, no ceremony. She showed up at schools and asked what they needed. Showed up at farms and learned what they faced. Showed up at markets and actually listened. The people were suspicious at first. Nobility didn't visit. Nobility sent representatives and expected reports. But Seraphine kept coming back. And slowly, very slowly, things began to change. A new roof on the village school in Thornfield, funded through reallocating decorative budget from the castle's western wing. Did she need 17 sets of formal china? Probably not. Updated farming equipment for the southern estates. Negotiated through direct conversations with manufacturers rather than going through the usual inflated contractor rates. Medical supplies for the outer territories. Organized through a network of suppliers she'd cultivated during those tedious diplomatic dinners her father used to drag her to. None of it flashy. None of it dramatic. All of it effective. And absolutely none of it approved by Duke Roderic Vayne, because she didn't ask. Mock. Roderic noticed something was different 6 weeks after the wedding. It was subtle. A shift in the castle's atmosphere. Servants moving with slightly less fear. Conversations happening in corners that stopped when he approached but resumed after he passed. Something had changed. He sat in his study reviewing estate reports and found the first concrete evidence. Marcus stood across the desk, looking uncomfortable, which meant bad news. "Explain this," Roderic said, tapping a line in the quarterly budget review. "The reallocation from decorative household to infrastructure, Your Grace. That was approved by the Duchess." "The Duchess." Roderic looked up slowly. "Approved by the Duchess," he repeated. "Since when does the Duchess approve budget reallocations? She has authority over household expenditures." The funds came from her wing's operational budget. To fund what, exactly? School repairs in Thornfield, medical supplies for Briarwood, equipment subsidies for the southern farms. Roderic sat back. Processing. "She's been visiting the villages." "Yes, Your Grace. Without approval." "She didn't require approval, Your Grace. She's the Duchess. She has authority to—" "I know what authority she has, Chancellor. What I want to know is why I'm learning about this from a budget report instead of from you." Marcus shifted. "Barely." "You didn't ask to be informed of her activities, Your Grace. I didn't think I needed to. I assumed she'd spend her time on decorative hobbies and social calls. She does make social calls. To farmers, and teachers, and village councils." Roderic felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Irritation, definitely, but also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like curiosity. How long has this been happening? 5 weeks. 5 weeks. She'd been systematically rebuilding parts of his duchy for 5 weeks, and he'd been completely oblivious. That was unacceptable. Also slightly impressive. Also absolutely irrelevant because the point wasn't her effectiveness. The point was control. "Schedule a meeting," he said. "With the Duchess, Your Grace?" "Yes, Marcus. With the Duchess. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My office." Marcus nodded and left. Roderic returned to the budget report but couldn't focus. She was supposed to be invisible, irrelevant, safely contained in her wing of the castle, occupying herself with whatever noblewomen occupied themselves with. Instead, she was out there, in his duchy, making decisions, creating change, disrupting his carefully constructed order. He should shut it down. Immediately. Establish clear boundaries and ensure she understood her place. But something held him back. The numbers didn't lie. The reallocations were smart. The improvements were needed. The villages were responding positively. She was doing his job better than his administrators. That was the part that bothered him most. Not that she was acting independently, but that she was succeeding. Tomorrow, he'd handle it. Set boundaries, reestablish control. Tomorrow. Seraphine received the meeting summons with zero surprise and significant irritation. Of course he'd noticed. Of course he'd disapprove. Of course he'd summon her like a subordinate rather than, say, walking down the hall and having a conversation like a normal human being. She showed up at his office at exactly 10 a.m., knocked once, and entered before he could respond. He looked up from his desk, clearly not expecting that level of audacity. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said pleasantly. "You wanted to see me?" Roderic stood, slowly, the movement calculated to remind her of his physical presence, his height, his authority. She didn't flinch. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand, thanks." His jaw tightened. "That tell again." "This isn't a negotiation, Lady Seraphine. Neither is my right to stand in your office, but here we are. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desk. Then, surprising her, he sat back down. Fine. Stand. But listen carefully. I've reviewed your recent activities. Congratulations. Your budget reallocations, your village visits, your infrastructure initiatives. She waited. They end now. Something hot flashed through her. Do they? Yes. You don't have authority to... I have authority over household expenditures. I used funds allocated to my wing. I broke no rules. You exceeded your position. My position as what? Your decorative acquisition? Your political placeholder? As Duchess. There are established systems, established chains of command. You don't bypass them. I didn't bypass anything. I identified needs and addressed them using resources available to me. Without consultation, without approval, without permission, she corrected. Because I don't need your permission to care about the people who supposedly belong to both of us. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Roderic stood again, walked around the desk, stopped 3 feet from her. This close, she could see the storm in his eyes wasn't just color. It was actual turbulence, actual emotion, buried deep but present. Let me be very clear, he said, voice low and dangerous. This duchy functions because of order, because of structure, because every person knows their role and stays within it. What you're doing, these independent actions, these unsanctioned changes, they create chaos. They create improvement. They create precedent. And precedent creates expectation. And expectation creates disruption when it's not met. So your solution is stagnation. My solution is stability. At the cost of actual human welfare? At the cost of whatever is necessary to maintain order. She laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound was harsh, bitter. You're terrified, she said. Excuse me? You're absolutely terrified. Not of chaos, not of change, of being vulnerable, of letting anyone close enough to matter. So you build these walls and call it strength. You enforce distance and call it leadership. You treat people like chess pieces and convince yourself it's strategy. You know nothing about me. I know enough. I know you're so scared of feeling anything real that you've turned yourself into a machine. I know you'd rather rule over ice than risk the warmth of actual human connection. I know. Enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Roderic's control was fracturing. She could see it. The tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on the desk edge, the muscle jumping in his jaw. Get out, he said quietly. Make me. She didn't know where the defiance came from. Didn't care. Roderic took one step closer. Now they were 18 inches apart, close enough to feel his presence like a physical force. You think you understand, he said, voice dropping to something dangerous. You think you figured me out based on 6 weeks of observation. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. No. Why not? Because it's none of your concern. I'm your wife. In name only. By contract. Not by choice. The words hit like a slap. Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes and absolutely refused to let them fall. Fine, she said quietly. I'll stay out of your way. I'll be the perfect decorative duchess. Silent. Distant. Irrelevant. Exactly what you wanted. She turned to leave. His hand caught her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly. She froze. They stood like that for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then Roderic released her like she'd burned him. Just stay within established protocols, he said. His voice had changed, lost some of its ice. That's all I'm asking. She looked back at him, saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Something almost human. Is it? She asked softly. Is that really all you're asking? He didn't answer. She left. Behind her, she didn't see Roderic sink into his chair, didn't see him put his head in his hands, didn't see the crack forming in his carefully constructed armor. But it was there, growing. The castle settled into an uneasy truce. Seraphine continued her village visits but started routing requests through proper channels. Technically compliant, practically unchanged. Roderic approved more of them than he rejected. Never in person, always through Marcus. But the approvals came. They still barely spoke, still maintained their careful distance. But something had shifted. She'd see him sometimes, watching from castle windows when she returned from visits. He'd disappear before she got close enough to acknowledge him. He started asking Marcus questions, nothing direct, just casual inquiries about which villages she'd visited, what issues she'd addressed, how the people responded. Marcus, no fool, reported everything to Mrs. Hallowell. Mrs. Hallowell, even less of a fool, said nothing to anyone but stored every detail like ammunition for a war she knew was coming, because the whole castle could feel it, the tension, the change, the slow, inevitable collision course between the Duke, who controlled everything, and the Duchess, who refused to be controlled. It came to a head 3 months after the wedding. A grand winter assembly required attendance for all major nobility, a display of power and prosperity, the social event of the season. Seraphine had been dreading it for weeks, not the event itself. She could handle noble politics, could smile and charm and navigate social minefields with the best of them. What she dreaded was appearing beside Roderic, playing the role of devoted wife to a man who could barely stand to look at her. The night arrived cold and glittering. The great hall had been transformed. Crystal everywhere, candlelight turning ice sculptures into diamonds, musicians playing something elegant and bloodless. Nobility arrived in waves, each family more peacocked than the last. Jewels and silks and the kind of desperate status-seeking that made Seraphine's skin crawl. She stood in her chambers staring at her reflection and barely recognized herself. The dress was stunning. Deep emerald velvet that Mrs. Hallowell had somehow procured. It fit perfectly. Made her look like she belonged in this world. She hated it. But she put on the matching jewelry, the Vayne family emeralds, heavy and cold against her skin. And there, on her left hand, the wedding ring Roderic had given her. She stared at it for a long moment. Then, deliberately, she took it off, set it on the vanity, left it there, and walked out. The assembly was exactly what she'd expected. Excessive, performative, exhausting. Roderic had greeted her with the same emotional warmth as a business associate. A nod, a formal arm offered for appearance's sake. Then nothing. They'd separated within minutes. Him to the political discussions, her to the social ones. She smiled, charmed, played her role perfectly, and noticed with growing satisfaction that people were paying attention, not to Roderic, to her, the Duchess who'd rebuilt village schools, who'd negotiated farming equipment deals, who'd actually visited the outer territories and knew the names of council members. She wasn't decoration anymore. She was a force, and the nobility noticed. Conversations shifted toward her, requests for her opinion, invitations to future events specifically addressed to her, not as the Duke's appendage but as her own entity. Influence, real, tangible influence. Across the hall, Roderic noticed too. He stood with a cluster of military advisors, half listening to discussion of border security, and found his attention drifting. To her. She was surrounded by nobles. The Thornfield Count, Lady Margaret from the eastern provinces, Lord Ashford who controlled half the southern trade routes, all of them leaning in, listening, laughing at something she said. She was radiant, confident, alive. Nothing like the quiet woman who'd arrived 3 months ago. Nothing like the decorative placeholder he'd expected. Something twisted in his chest. Not quite jealousy, not quite regret. Something complicated and unwelcome. He forced his attention back to the advisors, but couldn't focus. An hour later, he searched for her again. She was near the terrace doors, still surrounded, still glowing. And that's when he saw it. Her hand, gesturing as she spoke. Her bare hand. No ring. The wedding ring he'd given her. The Vayne family heirloom that had been on his mother's hand and his grandmother's before that. Gone. Something inside him cracked. Not anger. Worse than anger. Recognition. She'd removed it. Not lost it. Not forgotten it. Removed it. Deliberately. Publicly. A statement. A message. A quiet, devastating finality. She was done. And he'd driven her to it. Roderic moved without thinking. Crossed the hall with the kind of single-minded intensity that made people scatter. Reached her circle. Didn't excuse himself. Just took her elbow. "Excuse us," he said to the gathered nobles. His voice had that quality that made it clear it wasn't a request. Seraphine looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Your Grace, is something... We need to talk, now." He didn't wait for agreement. Just guided her, firmly but not roughly, away from the crowd, through the terrace doors, out into the winter night. The cold hit like a wall. She pulled away from him the moment they were outside. "What are you doing?" "I could ask you the same question." "I was having a conversation. Without your wedding ring." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at her hand, then back at him. "So? So? That ring represents a contract I fulfilled, a transaction completed. You made it very clear what this marriage is, Roderic. I'm just acknowledging reality. By publicly removing a family heirloom? By removing a symbol of something that doesn't exist." The cold was brutal, their breath fogged between them. Neither moved. "You're making a statement," he said. "I'm making a choice. There's a difference. To humiliate me? To free myself. From what? From the delusion that this might ever be real." Something in her voice broke him. The control he'd maintained for months, for years, for most of his adult life. It just broke. "Seraphine," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded different. Raw. Human. She looked up at him, and in the moonlight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "I tried," she whispered. "I really tried. I thought if I just gave you space, gave you time, didn't push. But you don't want a wife. You want a ghost. Someone who exists only when convenient and disappears when not. And I can't be that. I won't be that. I never asked you to be that. You did. Every time you avoided me. Every time you looked through me instead of at me. Every time you treated me like an obligation instead of a person. You asked for it with every word and action." The wind picked up, carried snow between them. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. The admission cost him. She could see it. Do what? This. Any of this. "I don't know how to let someone in." "Then let me go." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. Desperate. Seraphine laughed. It sounded broken. "You don't get both, Roderic. You don't get to keep me at distance and refuse to release me. Pick one." "I pick..." He stopped, because he didn't know how to finish that sentence. What did he pick? What did he actually want? 3 months ago, the answer would have been simple. Distance, control, order. Now, looking at her standing there in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks, wedding ring abandoned somewhere inside. Now he didn't know. Seraphine waited, gave him 10 seconds, 20. When he still didn't speak, she nodded. "That's what I thought." She turned to go back inside. "Wait." She stopped. Didn't turn around, just wait. He didn't know what he was asking for, didn't know what he could offer, just knew that her walking away felt like losing something he didn't realize he valued until it was gone. "Please." She turned back. The hope in her eyes was painful to see. "Give me something," she said quietly. "Anything, one real thing, one honest moment, something that tells me I'm not completely alone in this." Roderic stood there, walls crumbling, control fracturing, and faced the most terrifying decision of his life. Open up. Risk vulnerability, risk pain, risk loss. Or let her walk away and return to the safe, frozen isolation he'd built. The terrace doors burst open. Marcus stumbled out, face white, breathing hard. Your Grace, you need to come immediately." "Not now, Chancellor, Your Grace, it's the Council." "Lord Ashford, he's called for a formal challenge to your authority. Claims you've been distracted, compromised. Half the nobles inside are listening. If you don't address this now..." Roderic's entire body went rigid. Seraphine watched the transformation happen in real time, saw the vulnerability disappear, saw the walls slam back into place, saw the Duke replace the man. "Go," she said quietly. "Do what you do best. Rule, control, dominate." She walked past Marcus back inside. Roderic didn't follow immediately. He stood in the snow, fists clenched, and felt the full weight of his choices crash down. This was the cost. This was always the cost. Power demanded everything. Left nothing for softness, for connection, for her. He'd known that, had chosen it deliberately. So why did it feel like he was losing? Inside, Lord Ashford was standing on the grand staircase, commanding attention, making his case. Roderic entered the hall and every conversation died. The Duke had arrived, and he was done playing. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Lord Ashford stood on the grand staircase, one hand gripping the marble balustrade, the other gesturing toward the assembled nobility like a prosecutor presenting evidence. He was mid-50s, distinguished in that calculated way politicians cultivated, gray at the temples, expensive tailoring that screamed old money and older grudges. He'd been waiting for this moment. They all had. "The Duke of Blackthorn Vale has lost his focus," Ashford declared, voice carrying across the crystalline space. 3 months ago, he married for alliance, for strength, for the good of the realm. Yet what have we witnessed? A duchess running unsupervised through our territories, budget reallocations without proper oversight, decisions made in isolation rather than through established council protocols. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, carefully neutral, watching to see which way the wind would blow before committing. Roderic stood at the hall's entrance perfectly still and assessed the room with the cold precision of a general surveying a battlefield. Ashford had chosen his moment well. The winter assembly, maximum witnesses, maximum pressure, the kind of public challenge that demanded immediate response or risked looking weak. Smart, calculated, doomed. Because Lord Ashford had made one critical error in judgment. He'd assumed Roderic Vayne could be pressured. Roderic walked forward, not rushed, not defensive, each step measured, controlled. The crowd parted like water around a ship's prow. He stopped at the base of the staircase and looked up at Ashford with the expression of a man observing something mildly distasteful on his boot. "Finished?" Roderic asked. The casual dismissiveness of it landed like a slap. Ashford's face reddened. "Your Grace, I speak with the support of this council and the concern of your peers." "These are legitimate questions about what, precisely? My wife's charitable work? Her infrastructure improvements? Her successful negotiations that have saved this duchy considerable expense while improving quality of life in the outer territories?" "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Lord Ashford? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're criticizing effective governance. I'm criticizing the lack of proper oversight, the deviation from established protocols, the appearance that your Grace has been distracted." There it is. Roderic ascended 3 steps, slowly, deliberately. Now he was eye level with Ashford and the height advantage was gone. "Let me clarify something for everyone in this room," Roderic said, voice dropping to that dangerous register that made smart people nervous. "The Duchess of Blackthorn Vale operates with my full authority. Every budget reallocation, every village visit, every infrastructure project, all of it sanctioned, all of it effective. If you have concerns about outcomes, present them. If you have concerns about cost efficiency, document them. But if your concern is that my wife is too competent and it makes you uncomfortable, that's a personal problem." The room went dead silent. Ashford's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Your Grace, I merely suggest that proper channels or whatever I designate them to be," Roderic cut him off. "I am not distracted, Lord Ashford. I am delegating. There's a difference. One requires trust. The other requires micromanagement. I don't micromanage competent people." He paused. "Let that sink in. Now, unless you have actual governance concerns rather than political theater, I suggest you step down before you embarrass yourself further." Ashford's face had gone from red to purple. His hand on the balustrade tightened until knuckles went white. "This is not over," he said quietly. "You're right," Roderic agreed. "It's not. Because tomorrow morning, you and I will have a private discussion about your recent land acquisitions in the Western Territories. The ones you failed to properly report. The ones that coincidentally border the trade routes the Duchess just secured improved access to. We'll discuss whether those acquisitions were strategic planning or opportunistic land grabbing based on insider information." Ashford went white. "That's what I thought," Roderic said, dismissed. He turned his back. Ultimate disrespect. Ultimate confidence, walked away while Ashford stood there, publicly gutted, unable to respond. The nobility watched this with the hungry fascination of people witnessing a public execution. Some looked satisfied. Some looked terrified. All of them remembered why crossing the Duke of Blackthorn Vale was a bad idea. Roderic found Marcus near the eastern corridor. "Get me everything on Ashford's financials. Every transaction in the last 6 months. I want documentation on every square foot of land he's acquired and who approved it. Already done, Your Grace. It's on your desk." Of course it was. Marcus didn't survive 8 years by being slow. "Good. Draft a formal investigation notice. Make it official. I want him sweating by morning. Your Grace, if I may. And that was well played. It was necessary. It was also public support of the Duchess. The nobility noticed. Roderic's jaw tightened. They were supposed to. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Were they? Roderic didn't answer, just walked away. But the question followed him. Because Marcus was right. He'd just publicly endorsed Seraphine, claimed her work as sanctioned, defended her authority, all true statements. Also all things he'd criticized her for 6 hours ago in his office. The contradiction sat in his chest like a stone. He found himself scanning the crowd for her. Dark hair, emerald dress, that particular way she held herself that suggested grace under pressure. There. She was near the terrace doors where he'd left her, back to the wall, watching the aftermath of his confrontation with Ashford with an expression he couldn't quite read. Their eyes met across the hall. For a moment, everything else fell away. The noise, the people, the politics. Just her, looking at him like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Then someone blocked his view and the moment shattered. When he looked again, she was gone. Seraphine made it back to her chambers before the shaking started. Not fear, not anger. Something more complicated. She'd watched Roderic destroy Ashford with the casual efficiency of a man swatting a fly. Had listened to him defend her work, claim her authority, support her publicly in ways he'd never done privately. And she didn't know what any of it meant. Was it genuine or political theater? Had he defended her, or had he defended his own judgment in allowing her autonomy? Did it matter? She sat at her vanity, still in the emerald dress, and stared at the wedding ring she'd left there. Hours ago, removing it had felt like liberation, like finally acknowledging reality. Now it felt like she didn't know what it felt like. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Mrs. Hallowell entered, carrying a silver tray with tea and something that looked suspiciously like whiskey. Thought you might need this, the older woman said. Seraphine took the whiskey, drank it in one swallow, felt the burn. Thank you. Mrs. Hallowell set the tray down and, surprisingly, sat in the chair opposite. She never sat, never made herself comfortable. It was a deliberate breach of protocol. That was quite a show tonight. Which part? Me removing my wedding ring or the Duke publicly eviscerating a nobleman on my behalf? Both, I'd say. Though the second seemed somewhat connected to the first, Seraphine looked at her. Really looked. Mrs. Hallowell had been at Vanehold for 30 years, had served under the previous Duke, had watched Roderic transform from a young military officer to this. Did you know her? Seraphine asked. Alara? Mrs. Hallowell's expression flickered, surprised, then carefully neutral. I did. What was she like? Light. Mrs. Hallowell's voice softened. She was light. Everything about her was laughter and joy and the kind of warmth that made you believe in good things. She loved deeply, felt everything intensely. The exact opposite of his grace now. What happened? Fever. Eastern Village outbreak 9 years ago. She was visiting family, got sick, died in 3 days. Seraphine's chest tightened. And he became this? Mrs. Hallowell gestured vaguely. Systematic, controlled, closed off. He buried his grief by burying himself. Turned pain into power. Vulnerability into walls. Does he ever talk about her? Never. Not once in 9 years. But her portrait is in his private study. Only room in the castle I'm not allowed to clean. Of course it is. They sat in silence for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Seraphine asked. Because you need to understand what you're fighting. Mrs. Hallowell leaned forward. That man out there tonight, the one who defended you? That's not the Duke most people see. That's the ghost of who he used to be. Before loss taught him that caring about people makes them weapons that can be used against you. So I'm fighting a dead woman and 9 years of trauma. Excellent. No, child. You're fighting his belief that feeling anything is weakness. That's a harder battle than any dead rival. What if I can't win it? Mrs. Hallowell stood, smoothed her skirts. Then you decide if the attempt is worth the cost. Because trying to love a man who's terrified of being loved will break you if you're not careful. She left. Seraphine sat alone, staring at the wedding ring, and thought about costs and choices, and whether she had enough strength left to keep fighting. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows like a warning. Roderic didn't sleep. He sat in his study, Ashford's financial documents spread across his desk, and couldn't focus on a single word. His mind kept returning to the terrace, to Seraphine standing there in the snow, to the tears on her face, to the devastating simplicity of her question. Give me something. Anything. One real thing, and he'd frozen. Because giving her something real meant acknowledging she mattered, meant creating vulnerability, meant risking the exact devastation he'd spent 9 years ensuring could never happen again. When Alara died, something fundamental had broken inside him. The ability to trust that good things lasted. The belief that love was worth the inevitable pain of loss. He'd rebuilt himself by excising that weakness. Had created a version of himself that couldn't be hurt because it refused to care. It had worked. For 9 years, it had worked perfectly. Then Seraphine arrived and refused to be irrelevant. Refused to disappear. Refused to let him ignore her. And somehow, without his permission or awareness, she'd become something. Not replaceable, not forgettable, not safely distant. The realization terrified him, because if she mattered, she could be lost, could be taken, could die or leave, or 1,000 other ways of creating the exact pain he'd organized his entire life to avoid. But if she didn't matter, why had seeing her bare hand felt like being gutted? Why had defending her felt like breathing after drowning? Why was he sitting here at 3 a.m. thinking about her instead of working? A soft knock interrupted his spiral. "Come in." Marcus entered, looking exhausted. "Your Grace, Lord Ashford has requested a private audience tomorrow morning, wants to negotiate terms before the official investigation begins. Let him wait. Your Grace, he's offering to withdraw his challenge, publicly support your governance. He's essentially surrendering." "Good. Make him sweat another day first. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow afternoon." Marcus hesitated. "May I speak freely?" "When have you not? Tonight was necessary." But it also shifted the court's perception. They saw you defend the Duchess with more passion than you've shown for anything in years. That creates speculation about whether your judgment is compromised, about whether Lord Ashford might have had a point about distraction. "My judgment is perfect," Roderic said coldly. "I recognize competent governance and supported it. That's leadership, not distraction." "Of course, Your Grace. But perhaps clarifying your relationship with the Duchess might prevent future challenges. My relationship with the Duchess is none of the court's concern. With respect, everything about you is the court's concern. You're the Duke, your marriage is political, your wife's influence is growing. Clarity prevents exploitation." Roderic stood, walked to the window, stared out at darkness. "What kind of clarity?" "Public unity. Visible partnership. Let the court see you as a united front rather than whatever the current perception is, which is that you're conflicted, that she's an independent force you're struggling to control. That creates opportunity for people like Ashford." Roderic was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, "Schedule a joint meeting. Me and the Duchess. Tomorrow morning. With the full council. We'll address the infrastructure projects together. Show united governance." Marcus nodded. "Wise choice, Your Grace. It's strategy. Nothing more." "Of course." But after Marcus left, Roderic stood at the window and wondered who he was lying to. The court or himself. Seraphine received the meeting summons at dawn and wanted to throw something. A joint council meeting, her and Roderic, presenting infrastructure plans together, public unity, political theater. Exactly what she'd tried to avoid by removing the damn ring. She dressed with angry precision, navy dress, minimal jewelry, hair pinned back severely, professional, unapproachable. The armor of a woman who'd learned that vulnerability got exploited. She arrived at the council chambers exactly on time. Roderic was already there, standing at the head of the massive oak table. The councillors were arranged around him like chess pieces. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them. Not quite understanding, not quite trust, but acknowledgement, maybe, of the game they were playing, of the roles they'd been forced into. "Gentlemen," Roderic began without preamble, "this meeting addresses concerns raised about infrastructure management and duchy governance. The Duchess will present her initiatives. I will provide strategic context. Questions will be addressed jointly." He gestured to Seraphine. "Your Grace." It was the first time he'd used her title instead of her name. She stepped forward, placed her documentation on the table. Over the past 3 months, I've identified and addressed 7 critical infrastructure deficits in the outer territories. School facilities in Thornfield were structurally unsound. Medical supplies in Briarwood were rationed due to supply chain inefficiencies. Farming equipment in the southern estates was outdated by 15 years. She walked them through each project, cost analysis, efficiency improvements, return on investment, long-term stability benefits. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd done the work, who knew the numbers, who understood the human cost behind every statistic. The counselors listened. Some looked impressed. Some looked uncomfortable. All of them took notes. When she finished, Roderic spoke. These initiatives align with duchy-wide stability objectives. They address systemic weaknesses that posed long-term risk to territorial cohesion. The Duchess identified problems my administrators missed and implemented solutions more efficiently than traditional channels would have managed. This is effective delegation to competent authority. Any questions? Lord Hartwick, one of the senior counselors, raised his hand. Your Grace, these are indeed effective outcomes, but the concern is precedent. If the Duchess continues operating with this level of autonomy, she doesn't operate with autonomy, Roderic cut him off. She operates with my authority, which I grant based on demonstrated competence, just as I grant authority to you, Lord Hartwick, for trade negotiations, or to Lord Brennan for military logistics. This is standard governance structure. But she's your wife, not a counselor. She's the Duchess. That position carries inherent authority whether you acknowledge it or not. I'm simply utilizing available resources effectively. Seraphine watched this with strange detachment. He was defending her, again, framing her work as his decision, his strategy, which was technically accurate, also completely frustrating, because he was still maintaining control, still positioning himself as the source of her authority rather than acknowledging she'd earned it independently. She spoke before she could stop herself. Your Grace, if I may. Roderic looked at her. Surprise flickered in those gray eyes. Please. I appreciate the Council's concern about precedent. So let me be clear. My work in the territories isn't about autonomous operation. It's about collaborative governance. The Duke has strategic priorities that require his full attention. Border security, economic policy, political alliances. These are critical. What I'm addressing are implementation-level details, ground-level execution of broader strategic vision. She paused, met each counselor's eyes in turn. This isn't me operating independently. It's me functioning as part of an integrated leadership structure. The Duke sets direction. I ensure that direction translates into effective action in areas where direct oversight would be inefficient use of his time. The room was silent. She'd just positioned herself as an extension of his authority rather than a challenge to it, had framed her independence as efficiency rather than rebellion. Political judo, using the system's logic against itself. Across the table, Roderic stared at her with something that might have been respect, or might have been calculation. Hard to tell. Well said, Your Grace, he said quietly. Any further concerns? Silence. Excellent. Dismissed. The counselors filed out, slowly, reluctantly, clearly hoping for more drama. They didn't get it. Within minutes, the room was empty except for Seraphine and Roderic. They stood on opposite sides of the oak table, 10 feet of polished wood between them. Might as well have been miles. That was... Roderic started. Strategic? Seraphine finished. I know. I'm learning. You positioned yourself perfectly. Use their concerns to reinforce rather than challenge the power structure. I'm a quick study. Apparently. Silence settled. Uncomfortable. Loaded with everything they weren't saying. Why did you defend me last night? Seraphine asked. To Ashford. You eviscerated him. Why? Because he was wrong. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. She laughed, bitter. Of course it is. God forbid you actually explain something. God forbid you be honest for 5 consecutive seconds. I am being honest. No. You're being strategic. You defended me because it served your purposes. Because letting Ashford's challenge stand would have made you look weak. Not because you actually what? Care. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Actually care whether I exist beyond political utility. Roderic's expression closed down. That wall slamming back into place. This is what we are, Seraphine. This is what this marriage is. Political partnership. Strategic alliance. I thought we'd established that. We did. You made it very clear. I'm just trying to understand why you're acting like it might be something else. I'm not. Last night on the terrace, you told me to wait. You said, please, that's not strategy. That's something else. That was a mistake. Was it? Yes. They stared at each other across the table. Seraphine felt something inside her crystallize, a decision forming. Fine, she said. Then let's be what we are. Political partners. Nothing more. I'll do my work. You'll do yours. We'll present united fronts when required. And we'll stop pretending there's anything personal in this arrangement. Agreed. Perfect. She turned to leave, stopped, turned back. One question, though. Roderic waited. When you look at me, do you see me? Or do you see the space where someone else used to be? Direct hit. She watched it land. Watched him flinch. I see the Duchess of Blackthorn Vale, he said carefully. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer that matters. To you, maybe. Not to me. She left before he could respond. Behind her, Roderic stood alone in the council chamber and felt the weight of 9 years of armor pressing down like a stone. Whack. The narrative people tell themselves about their own lives is often the biggest lie they believe. Roderic Vayne had spent 9 years constructing a story about strength through isolation, about power requiring distance, about loss teaching you that attachment was weakness. It was a good story. Internally consistent, emotionally protective, completely sustainable. Right up until it wasn't. The thing about walls was they kept things out, but they also kept things in. And Roderic was discovering that the fortress he'd built around himself had become a prison. He threw himself into work. The Ashford investigation, border security reviews, economic policy updates, 18-hour days of pure focus and zero reflection. It worked for a week. Then the reports started coming in, not from his administrators, from the territories themselves. The Duchess of Blackthorn Vale had visited the northern mining communities, had negotiated better safety equipment, had listened to worker concerns about ventilation systems, and actually implemented changes. The Duchess had established a scholarship fund for outer territory children, funded entirely through reallocating her personal household budget. The Duchess had mediated a land dispute between 2 farming families that had been festering for 3 years, found a compromise in 2 hours that satisfied both parties. Every report the same pattern. She showed up, she listened, she solved problems. And the people loved her. Not feared. Loved. The distinction was starting to eat at him. Marcus delivered the reports with careful neutrality, but Roderic could see it, the unspoken question. Why aren't you doing this? Why is your wife better at connecting with your people than you are? He didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to examine too closely. Because connecting meant caring, and caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. Simple equation, perfect logic, absolute misery. 1 month after the winter assembly, Roderic found himself walking through the castle late at night, unable to sleep, and somehow ended up outside the western wing. Her wing. The lights were still on in her chambers. 2 a.m., and she was awake. He should turn around, should go back to his own quarters, should maintain the distance they'd agreed to. Instead, he knocked. Long pause. Then, come in. He opened the door. She was sitting at her desk, surrounded by paperwork, still dressed despite the hour, hair falling out of its pins. She looked exhausted. She also looked beautiful. That thought arrived unwanted and stuck. Your Grace, she said, formal, distant. Is something wrong? No, I saw your light, wanted to ensure everything was... He trailed off. Because how did he finish that sentence? Ensure everything was what? Fine? Under control? Any of those excuses sounded weak. Seraphine waited. Didn't help him. What are you working on? He asked finally. Educational curriculum review. The outer territory schools are using materials 20 years out of date. I'm developing a standardization proposal. At 2 in the morning. Problems don't sleep. Why should I? You should sleep because exhaustion impairs judgment. I'll keep that in mind. Anything else? The dismissal was clear, polite, but absolute. He should leave. Should take the out she was offering. Why are you doing this? He asked instead. Doing what? All of it. The villages, the schools, the endless projects. You could stay in the castle, live comfortably, fulfill the minimum requirements of your position, and otherwise do nothing. Why do you care? She set down her pen, looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. Because someone should. Because those people deserve better than being treated like chess pieces. Because I have the resources and authority to help, and using them for anything less seems like a waste. That's not your responsibility. Whose is it? Yours? Because you're too busy maintaining control to actually see what's happening in your own duchy. Your administrators report numbers. I report lives. There's a difference. The accuracy of it stung. I maintain stability. You maintain order. That's not the same thing. Order without care is just tyranny with good PR. I am not a tyrant, aren't you? You rule through fear. You make decisions without consultation. You remove anyone who challenges you. What else would you call that? Effective leadership. She laughed. Harsh. Effective. Right. Tell me something, Roderic. When was the last time someone in your council disagreed with you? Frequently. Publicly? Out loud? To your face? He didn't answer, because she knew the answer. That's what I thought. You don't have advisors. You have yes men who've learned that disagreement is career suicide. That's not strength. That's isolation. It prevents betrayal. It prevents connection. There's a difference. Connection is a liability. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, isolation is the bigger liability. You're so terrified of being hurt that you've made yourself untouchable. And untouchable means alone. And alone means you've already lost the only battle that actually matters, which is being human. The words hit like a punch. Roderic stood there, every defense he'd carefully constructed crumbling, and had no response. Seraphine stood, walked closer, stopped 3 feet from him. You asked why I care, she said quietly. Here's why. Because caring about people, actually giving a damn whether they're okay, is the only thing that makes any of this matter. Power without purpose is just ego. Control without compassion is just cruelty. And I refuse to live in a castle full of beautiful things and empty connections and call that success. She was close enough now that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the determined set of her jaw, the tears she was refusing to shed. I'm not asking you to love me, Roderic. I'm not even asking you to like me. But I'm asking you to see me. Actually, see me. Not as a political acquisition or a strategic asset or a placeholder for whoever you lost. Just see me. He did see her. That was the problem. He saw her courage and her stubborn refusal to accept his walls and her absolute commitment to making a difference, and the way candlelight caught in her dark hair and the intelligence burning in her eyes, and it terrified him. Because seeing her men acknowledging she mattered, and if she mattered, she could be lost. He took a step back. I should go. Of course you should. God forbid you stay in an uncomfortable conversation long enough to actually resolve something. Seraphine, don't. Just don't. I'm tired, Roderic. I'm tired of fighting for scraps of humanity from someone who's determined to be a machine. So yes, go. Run back to your office and your reports and your perfect control. I'll be here, doing the work, caring about people, being human enough for both of us. He turned to leave, stopped at the door. Your curriculum proposal, he said without looking back. Have it on my desk tomorrow. I'll review it personally. Why? Because you're right. The materials are outdated, and your solution is probably better than anything my administrators would develop. Silence behind him. Then, quietly, thank you. He left before she could say anything else. Before he could say anything else. Because the words building in his chest, I see you, I'm terrified of you, you make me want things I swore I'd never want again. Those weren't things he could say. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as he walked back through empty corridors to his empty chambers, Roderic Vayne confronted an unavoidable truth. His perfect control was failing, his carefully maintained distance was crumbling, and the woman he'd tried so hard to keep at arm's length had somehow gotten close enough to matter. Which meant he had a choice to make. Let her in and risk everything, or push her away and lose something he was only beginning to realize he wanted. The decision should have been simple. It should have been obvious. It was neither, and that, more than anything, told him how fundamentally everything had changed. Winter gave way to early spring with the reluctant grace of something dying slowly. The snow melted, the roads cleared, and with them came news that changed everything. Roderic was in his study, reviewing Seraphine's curriculum proposal, which was, annoyingly, excellent, when Marcus burst in without knocking. Your Grace. Border Patrol reports movement, Eastern Territory, Armed Forces. Estimated 200 soldiers bearing Lord Ashford's colors. Every thought in Roderic's head went silent. Ashford, he said. The word was ice. After the investigation began, he fled to his eastern holdings, apparently spent the last month gathering forces and allies. He's marching on Vaynehold. How long? They'll reach the castle by nightfall. Roderic stood, battle-ready in an instant, every soft thought about Seraphine evaporating under the hard clarity of threat assessment. Mobilize the garrison, secure the castle, get word to our allied lords. I want 300 soldiers battle-ready within the hour. Already in motion, Your Grace. Where's the Duchess? Last report, she was visiting the eastern villages. The eastern villages, where Ashford's forces were marching. Roderic felt ice flood his veins. Get her back. Now, Your Grace, the roads. I don't care about the roads. Send riders. Send the fastest horses we have. Get her back to the castle before Ashford's forces reach her. Yes, Your Grace. Marcus left at a run. Roderic stood alone in his study and felt something fundamental shift. Ashford wasn't just challenging his authority. Ashford was threatening everything in the duchy, including her. And the thought of Seraphine in danger, potentially captured, potentially used as leverage against him, the rage that rose in him was absolute. He'd destroyed men for less, had ended entire families for challenging his power. But this wasn't about power. This was personal. And that realization, more than anything, told him how completely she'd gotten under his defenses. He grabbed his sword, strapped it on, headed for the garrison. Time to remind Lord Ashford why crossing the Duke of Blackthorn Vale was a terminal mistake. Seraphine was 3 miles from the castle when she heard the hoofbeats behind her. Her guard captain, Thomas, moved his horse closer to hers immediately. Riders approaching fast, my lady. How many? 4. Bearing ducal colors. Relief flooded through her. Reinforcements, then, or a message from the castle. The riders caught up quickly. One of them was Marcus's lieutenant, face grim. Your Grace, you need to return to the castle immediately. What's happened? Lord Ashford has mobilized forces. He's marching on Vaynehold. The Duke requires you behind secure walls. Ashford. Of course. She should have known he wouldn't accept defeat quietly. How long until his forces arrive? They'll reach the outer territories within 2 hours. The castle by nightfall. Then we ride. Now. They turned, rode hard toward Vaynehold, and Seraphine felt a strange calm settle over her. Not fear. Something sharper. Because she'd spent 3 months learning this duchy, learning its people, learning its defenses. And if Ashford thought marching on the castle was his path to victory, he'd severely underestimated what he was walking into. They reached Vaynehold as the sun began its descent. The castle was transformed, garrison soldiers everywhere, fortifications being reinforced, weapons being distributed. And in the center of it all, directing movements with absolute precision, was Roderic. He saw her immediately, crossed the courtyard in long strides. Are you injured? No. We made it back safely. Good. His eyes scanned her like he was checking for damage. The intensity of it was almost physical. Where do you need me? She asked. Inside. Secure quarters. This is a military operation, like hell. I know the eastern approach is better than most of your soldiers. I've been visiting those territories for months. I can help. Seraphine, don't you dare send me to some tower to wait like a helpless decoration. I'm the Duchess. This is my duchy too. Use me or get out of my way. They stared at each other. Around them, soldiers pretended not to watch. Then Roderic made a decision that surprised them both. Fine. War room. Now. You'll provide intelligence on Eastern Territory layouts. She followed him inside. The war room was controlled chaos. Maps spread across tables, officers marking positions, scouts reporting movement. Roderic positioned himself at the main table. Ashford is approaching from the east with approximately 200 soldiers. We have 300 garrison troops, plus whatever allied support reaches us in time. Defense advantage is ours, but his forces are mobile. He'll try to avoid direct assault and instead blockade supply lines. Seraphine studied the map, saw immediately what Ashford was planning. He's not trying to take the castle, she said. He's trying to isolate it, cut off the eastern villages, force you to choose between defending Vanehold and protecting your territories. Roderic looked at her. Yes. And if you defend the castle, the villages fall. If you defend the villages, you leave Vanehold vulnerable. Exactly. Classic tactical bind. Unless, Seraphine said slowly, you defend neither. Roderic's expression sharpened. What do you mean? I mean, Ashford expects you to react defensively, to protect what you have. But you've taught me something these past months. The best defense is often unexpected offense. You're suggesting we attack. I'm suggesting we don't give him the chance to set his blockade. His forces are mobile but spread thin. They have to cover multiple approach routes. That's not strength. That's vulnerability. She pointed to the map, where the eastern roads converged before splitting toward different villages. Here, this junction. Every route he could take funnels through this point. If you position forces here, you cut off his mobility advantage, force him to commit to a single approach, turn his flexibility into a trap. The room went silent, every officer staring at the map, seeing it. Roderic studied the junction, then looked at her. That's aggressive. That's decisive. And it's a strategy he won't expect from someone he thinks is distracted and compromised. The ghost of a smile crossed Roderic's face. You're suggesting I use his perception against him. I'm suggesting you prove that the Duke of Blackthorn Vale hasn't lost his edge, just found better strategic counsel. For a moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with recognition. Then Roderic turned to his officers. Change deployment. Send 200 soldiers to the eastern junction. Fortified positions. I want Ashford boxed before he realizes what's happening. Leave 100 here for castle defense. We move in 1 hour. The room exploded into motion. Officers shouting orders, soldiers mobilizing, maps being updated. Roderic pulled Seraphine aside. That was brilliant, he said quietly. That was practical. You've been so focused on protecting the castle, you forgot the duchy itself is the real strategic asset. Ashford made the same mistake, which is why he's going to lose. Roderic looked at her. Really looked. The way she'd asked him 2 months ago. Thank you, he said, for the tactical advice, for being here, for not running, for what? For making me remember that strength isn't always solitary. Before she could respond, Marcus interrupted. Your Grace, the 1st Battalion is ready to deploy. Roderic nodded, turned back to Seraphine. Stay in the castle. If anything happens, I'll hold the line here. Go. Do what you do best. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he left. And Seraphine stood in the war room, surrounded by maps and strategy, and realized with absolute clarity that somewhere in the past months, she'd stopped fighting for survival and started fighting for something else entirely. For this. For him. For the possibility that the fortress he'd built around himself might have a door after all. But first, they had to survive the night. Ashford's forces reached the eastern junction 2 hours after sunset and walked directly into Roderic's trap. 200 soldiers, fortified positions, high ground advantage. Ashford's mobility advantage evaporated instantly. The battle was swift, brutal, decisive. Roderic led from the front, not because he had to, but because watching from behind had never been his style. He fought with the cold precision of someone who'd spent years turning violence into art. Every movement calculated, every strike efficient, no wasted energy, no hesitation. This was what he was good at. Control through overwhelming force, victory through absolute certainty. By midnight, Ashford's forces were routed. By dawn, Ashford himself was captured. They brought him to the castle in chains, defeated, humiliated, finished. Roderic stood in the great hall, watching the man who dared challenge him kneel in surrender, and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just cold assessment. You gambled and lost, Roderic said. What did you think would happen? Ashford looked up, face bruised, pride shattered. I thought you'd become weak. Thought marriage had softened you. Marriage didn't soften me. It gave me better strategic counsel than your entire operation managed to provide you. He gestured to the guards. Take him to the dungeons. We'll decide his fate after proper trial. They dragged Ashford away. The hall emptied, officers returning to their posts, soldiers standing down. Roderic stood alone in the space where he'd destroyed Ashford's challenge and realized the victory felt hollow. Because the woman who'd made it possible wasn't there to see it. He found her in the war room, still studying maps, still working. "It's over," he said from the doorway. She looked up, saw something in his face. "We won?" "Completely. Ashford's captured, his forces surrendered, the duchy is secure." Relief flooded her expression. "Good. That's good. It's more than good. It's decisive. And it wouldn't have happened without your strategy. I just pointed out an obvious tactical option. You saw what my officers missed, what I missed. You thought beyond defensive reaction to offensive opportunity." He walked closer. "You saved the duchy tonight, Seraphine. We saved it, together." They stood there in the empty war room, maps between them, and everything that hadn't been said over the past months hung in the air like smoke. Roderic opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I've been wrong," he said finally, "about everything." She waited. "I thought distance was strength, thought isolation was safety, thought keeping you at arm's length was protecting us both. And now? Now I think I've been protecting myself from the one thing I actually needed, which is..." He took a step closer, then another, until they were inches apart. "You," he said simply. "I need you. Not as political alliance or strategic asset, as you. And that terrifies me more than any battle, more than any challenge to my authority, because you can hurt me in ways no enemy ever could. By leaving? By existing. By being brilliant and stubborn and impossibly brave. By making me care whether you're safe, whether you're happy, whether you look at me and see someone worth staying for." Seraphine's breath caught. "Roderic," she whispered, "I can't promise I'll be good at this. Can't promise I won't retreat back into control when it gets hard. Can't promise I've exercised 9 years of trauma in one conversation. But I can promise I want to try. If you'll let me." "Try what?" "Being your husband. Actually your husband. Not the contract you agreed to, but the partnership we could be." The tears she'd been holding back for months finally fell. "You complete bastard," she said. "Making me wait 3 months for this." "I know, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it." "I know that too." She stepped closer, close enough to touch. "I removed my wedding ring," she said, "that night at the assembly. Took it off and left it on my vanity and walked away from you. I know. I saw. Did you also see that I never threw it away? Never sold it. Never actually gave up on the possibility that you might eventually pull your head out of your ass long enough to see what was right in front of you." He smiled. Actually smiled, the expression transforming his face into something warm, human, real. "I see you," he said. "I see you, Seraphine, and I'm sorry it took me so long." She rose on her toes, kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative. It was months of frustration and hope and stubborn determination poured into a single moment of absolute certainty. He kissed her back like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seraphine looked at him with something fierce and determined in her eyes. "Don't make me regret this," she said. "I'll try my best not to. Try isn't good enough. Promise me. I promise to keep trying. Every day. Even when it's hard. Even when I want to retreat. I'll keep trying to be someone worthy of you. That's all I'm asking." He pulled her close, held her like she was the most valuable thing in his fortress, and realized with absolute clarity that she was. The duchy could be rebuilt. The castle could be defended. Power could be regained. But her? She was irreplaceable. And that was the most terrifying, most liberating realization of his life. The dawn after victory should have tasted sweet. Roderic woke with Seraphine in his arms for the first time in their marriage. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. The winter light filtering through the windows turned everything gentle. He lay there, watching her sleep, and felt something he hadn't felt in 9 years. Peace. Not the cold stillness of absolute control, not the enforced calm of systematic suppression. Actual peace. The kind that came from letting someone close enough to matter and discovering they didn't destroy you for the vulnerability. She stirred, eyes opening slowly, focused on him. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning. You're staring. I'm allowed. You're my wife." She smiled. Actual warmth in it. "Took me long enough to get you to acknowledge that. Better late than never." "Is it, though? Because you put me through 3 months of hell." "I know. I'm sorry. You've said that. Multiple times. I'm starting to think you need more creative ways to apologize. He kissed her. Slow, deliberate, thorough. When he pulled back, she was flushed, breathing harder. That's a start, she said. Good, because I plan to spend considerable time making up for those 3 months. Considerable time? Years, probably. She laughed, bright and genuine. The sound filled the room like light, and Roderic felt the last piece of armor he'd been carrying finally fall away. This was what he'd been protecting himself from. This feeling, this connection, this terrifying, exhilarating certainty that she mattered more than anything. It should have scared him. Instead, it felt like finally breathing after years underwater. They rose, dressed, made their way down to breakfast together for the first time since the wedding. The castle staff noticed immediately. The way he held her hand, the way she leaned into him, the way they moved together like they'd been doing this for years instead of one night. Mrs. Hallowell saw them enter the morning room, and her stern face cracked into something that might have been approval. "Your Graces," she said, "breakfast is ready." "Thank you, Mrs. Hallowell." They sat, ate, talked about everything and nothing, the infrastructure proposal Seraphine was developing, the political fallout from Ashford's failed coup, plans for the duchy's future, normal conversation. Domestic, almost. It was shockingly easy, like they'd been waiting for permission to be real with each other, and someone had finally granted it. Marcus arrived mid-breakfast, looking apologetic. "Your Grace, I hate to interrupt, but there are matters requiring attention." "Of course." "What matters?" "Lord Ashford's trial. The council wants to convene this afternoon to determine sentencing." Roderic nodded. Standard procedure. The man had committed treason. Mobilized armed forces against his duke. The sentence would be death or permanent exile. Either way, finished. Schedule it for 3. I'll preside. Yes, Your Grace. Also, several allied lords have sent correspondence requesting audiences. They want to reaffirm their allegiances after the recent disruption. Political maneuvering. Everyone wanted to be seen supporting the winning side. Schedule those for tomorrow, 1 hour each. And Marcus? Yes, Your Grace. Make sure they understand the Duchess will be present for all major political discussions. This isn't a courtesy meeting, it's policy. Marcus's expression flickered. Surprise. Then understanding. Of course, Your Grace. I'll make that clear. He left. Seraphine looked at Roderic with raised eyebrows. You're including me in political audiences? You're the one who developed half the strategic initiatives they'll be discussing. Why wouldn't I include you? Because yesterday you were ready to lock me in a tower during the battle. Yesterday I was terrified you'd be hurt. Today, I'm remembering you're the one who won the battle. There's a difference. She reached across the table, took his hand. Thank you. For what? For changing, for trying, for not being the man you were 3 months ago. He squeezed her hand. Don't thank me yet. I'm still learning how to do this. I'll probably mess up. Probably. But you'll try to fix it. That's enough. They finished breakfast, separated for their respective duties. Roderic to council preparations. Seraphine to continue her infrastructure work. But they moved differently now, connected even when apart. Like something fundamental had shifted in the foundation of Vaynehold itself. Roderic spent the morning reviewing case documentation for Ashford's trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Armed mobilization against ducal authority, attempted coup, conspiracy to overthrow legitimate governance. Open and shut. The council would vote for execution. Roderic would approve it. Justice would be served. He signed the final documents and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just cold assessment. Ashford had made his choice. Now he'd face the consequences. That was how power worked. Clean, simple, absolute. At 2:30, Marcus returned, looking troubled. Your Grace, we have a complication. What kind of complication? Lord Brennan has requested a private audience before the trial. Says he has information critical to the proceedings. Brennan, one of his most trusted military advisors, solid, reliable, had served the duchy for 15 years. Send him in. Brennan entered, mid-40s, military bearing, the kind of man who looked uncomfortable in formal settings but deadly competent in crisis. Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. What information do you have? Brennan hesitated. That alone was unusual. The man didn't hesitate. It's about Lord Ashford's coup attempt. We already have all the evidence we need for conviction. Yes, Your Grace. But you don't have all the evidence about who supported it. Roderic went still. Explain. Brennan pulled out a folded document, set it on the desk. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by one of Ashford's representatives, offered significant financial incentive to delay troop deployment if conflict arose. I refused. Reported it to my chain of command. To whom? To Chancellor Marcus Thorne. And he told me he'd handle it. Said not to mention it to anyone else. Said it was being investigated quietly to avoid tipping off other potential conspirators. Roderic's hands went cold. What are you saying? I'm saying Marcus has been sitting on intelligence about Ashford's conspiracy for 3 weeks. Didn't inform you. Didn't mobilize counterintelligence. Didn't do anything except tell me to stay quiet. That doesn't make sense. Marcus has served this duchy for 8 years. Why would he? Brennan unfolded the document, pushed it across the desk. Because, according to these financial records I acquired through unofficial channels, Marcus has been receiving payments from Ashford for the past 6 months. The world went very quiet. Roderic picked up the document. Read it. Once, twice. The numbers didn't change. Regular deposits, significant amounts. Timing that aligned perfectly with key political decisions over the past half year. His most trusted advisor, his right hand. The man who knew every strategic plan, every vulnerability, every confidential discussion. Bought. How did you get this? Roderic asked. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. I have contacts in the banking sector. After Marcus shut down my report, I started digging. Found the accounts, the payments, the pattern. Why are you bringing this to me now? Because the trial is today. Because if Marcus is compromised, every decision made over the past 6 months is suspect. Because you deserve to know who you can actually trust. Roderic sat back, processing. 8 years, 8 years of service, of apparent loyalty, of competent execution. All of it a lie. The betrayal hit different than he expected. Not hot anger, cold assessment. Because this was what happened when you let people close. When you trusted. When you believed loyalty was earned rather than bought. Everyone had a price. Everyone could be turned. He'd known that. Had built his entire governance philosophy around that understanding. And then he'd gotten soft. Had started to believe maybe connection was possible. Maybe trust could be real. 3 months with Seraphine, and he'd forgotten the fundamental truth. People betrayed you. Always. Eventually. Your Grace? Brennan's voice pulled him back. Roderic looked up. Brennan was watching him with concern. Does anyone else know about this? No, Your Grace, just you and me. Good. Keep it that way. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Return to your duties. I'll handle Marcus. Brennan hesitated. Your Grace, if he's been feeding information to Ashford, he might have contingencies. Other conspirators. This could run deeper than, I said I'll handle it. The ice in his voice made Brennan straighten. Yes, Your Grace. He left. Roderic sat alone with the financial records and felt every wall he'd started to lower slam back into place. Marcus had been there from the beginning, had helped rebuild the duchy after his father's death, had navigated every political crisis, had stood beside him through everything, and had been selling him out for 6 months. The question was why. Money was the obvious answer. But Marcus made significant salary, had access to duchy resources. Financial motivation seemed insufficient, which meant it was personal, or political, or both. Roderic stood, walked into his private safe, retrieved the documents he kept there, the ones only he had access to, personnel files, background investigations, loyalty assessments. He found Marcus's file, opened it, and there, buried in the family history section, was the answer he should have seen years ago. Marcus Thorne, younger brother to Elena Thorne, who had been engaged to Duke Edmund Vayne, Roderic's father. Before Edmund married Roderic's mother instead. Family grudge, generational resentment, the kind of poison that festered for decades. Marcus had spent 8 years earning trust, positioning himself, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Ashford's coup had been that moment, except Roderic had won, had crushed the rebellion, had secured the duchy, which meant Marcus was now exposed, vulnerable, desperate, dangerous. Roderic moved to the door, called for guards. Bring me Chancellor Marcus Thorne, immediately. Full escort. Your Grace is something... Now. They left at a run. Roderic returned to his desk, Sat down, waited. 8 years of apparent loyalty about to collapse into confrontation. He should feel angry, should feel betrayed. Instead, he felt vindicated. This was why distance mattered, why walls were necessary, why trusting anyone completely was naive. The door opened 10 minutes later. Marcus entered, flanked by 4 guards. His expression confused. "Your Grace, what's this about?" Roderic gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Marcus sat, slowly, reading the room, starting to understand something was wrong. "Your Grace, if this is about the trial preparations, it's not about the trial, it's about you." He slid the financial records across the desk. Marcus looked down, saw the documents, went pale. The silence stretched. Then, finally, Marcus spoke. "Where did you get those? Does it matter?" "It matters if you're making decisions based on incomplete information. The information looks pretty complete to me. 6 months of payments from Lord Ashford, corresponding with strategic intelligence he would have had access to through his position in my council, and a family history that gives you motive for wanting to see my duchy fall." Marcus's face hardened. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me. My sister loved your father, genuinely loved him. He chose political alliance over her, married your mother for her family's connections, left Elena heartbroken. She never recovered, died alone, bitter. And you blame my father for that. I blame your entire family for treating people like chess pieces, just like you've done your whole life. Just like you did to the Duchess, until she forced you to see her as human." Roderic's hand tightened on the desk edge. "So you sold duchy intelligence to Ashford as revenge? I provided Ashford with information because this duchy deserves better than a duke who rules through fear and isolation. You're brilliant, Your Grace, tactically perfect, strategically sound, and completely incapable of caring about anything beyond power. I care about stability. You care about control. There's a difference, and that difference has cost this duchy dearly. The villages you neglected, the people you treated as resources, the advisors you intimidated into silence, all of it justified by your need for absolute authority." Marcus stood, the guards tensed. "I thought Ashford would be better. Thought new leadership might restore humanity to governance? I was wrong. He's as power-hungry as you, but at least I tried to change something by committing treason, by trying to save this duchy from becoming a monument to one man's inability to connect with anyone." The words landed like blows, because they were true, had been true, were becoming less true but still carried weight. Roderic stood, faced Marcus across the desk. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was that man, isolated, controlled, incapable of connection, but I'm not anymore. And you would have seen that if you'd waited instead of betraying everything you claimed to believe in. 1 month of softness doesn't erase 12 years of tyranny. Maybe not, but it's a start, which is more than you gave me credit for." He gestured to the guards. "Take him to the dungeons. He'll be tried alongside Ashford." Marcus didn't resist, just looked at Roderic with something that might have been pity. "You'll never escape what you are, Your Grace. The Duchess might have made you feel something temporarily, but your nature will reassert itself. It always does. Get him out of here." They dragged Marcus away. Roderic stood alone in his office and felt the foundation of his world crack. Because Marcus was right about one thing. For 12 years, he'd ruled through fear and distance, had treated people as tools, had prioritized control over connection. And the moment he'd started to change, the moment he'd let Seraphine in, his most trusted advisor had been revealed as a traitor, the universe delivering a message. Connection was weakness. Trust was liability. Vulnerability invited betrayal. He'd known that, had organized his entire life around that truth. 3 months with Seraphine, and he'd forgotten. Now reality was reasserting itself. The question was what he'd do about it. Bus. He found Seraphine in the library, surrounded by books and papers, working on her education initiatives with the kind of focused intensity he recognized because he deployed it himself. She looked up when he entered, smiled. The smile died when she saw his face. "What happened?" "Marcus has been arrested for treason. He's been feeding intelligence to Ashford for 6 months. Her hand went to her mouth. "No? Yes?" "Financial records, confirmed payments, family motive going back generations." "How did you find out?" "Brennan brought me evidence. had been investigating on his own after Marcus shut down his initial report about Ashford's conspiracy. Seraphine stood, walked to him, took his hands. "I'm sorry. I know he was important to you. He was a tool that outlived its usefulness. That's all." The coldness in his voice made her flinch. "Roderic, don't do this." "Do what?" "Retreat back into that ice. I can see it happening. Someone betrayed you, so you're shutting down, rebuilding walls. Convincing yourself connection was the mistake. Connection was the mistake. If I'd maintained proper distance, if I'd kept appropriate oversight instead of trusting his apparent loyalty, I would have caught this months ago. Or maybe Marcus would have been loyal if you'd treated him like a person instead of an asset. Don't. Don't what? Tell you the truth? Marcus betrayed you because he resented 12 years of being treated as expendable. Because he watched you rule through fear and decided anything was better than that. Yes, he was wrong. Yes, he committed treason. But you created the environment that made betrayal seem justified. So this is my fault. I'm saying your approach to governance has consequences. And one of those consequences is that people who might have been loyal under different circumstances chose betrayal instead. Roderic pulled his hands away. You've been here 3 months, Seraphine. 3 months of seeing the duchy during relative peace. You have no idea what it takes to maintain control when every noble is looking for weakness, when every decision is scrutinized for opportunity, when loyalty is temporary and self-interest is permanent. So your solution is to trust no one? To treat everyone as potential enemies? My solution is to never forget that's exactly what they are. Even me? The question hung between them. Roderic looked at her, at the woman he'd opened himself to, at the vulnerability he'd allowed, at the risk he'd taken, and felt every instinct he'd developed over 12 years screaming at him to retreat, to rebuild distance, to eliminate the liability. "I don't know," he said finally. The hurt in her eyes was immediate. "You don't know. I don't know if I can do this. Trust, connection, all of it. Marcus just proved why I was right to maintain walls, why isolation is safer. Why letting people close invites exactly this kind of disaster. Marcus proved that people respond to how they're treated. You want loyalty? Earn it. You want trust? Give it. You can't rule through fear and expect devotion. I can expect obedience. That's sufficient. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, obedience without loyalty is just waiting for the first good betrayal opportunity. Then maybe I should stop waiting and start assuming. You're talking about purging the entire council. I'm talking about implementing proper security protocols, background investigations, loyalty assessments, financial oversight, all the things I should have been doing instead of getting distracted by what? By me? Her voice broke on the question. Roderic stopped. Because yes, that's exactly what he meant, getting distracted by her, by the possibility of connection, by the fantasy that maybe this time would be different. Marcus had just reminded him fantasies were dangerous. "I need to handle this," he said. "Alone." "Of course you do. God forbid you actually let someone help you through a crisis. This isn't help. This is noise. I need clarity. What you need is to stop running every time things get complicated." "I'm not running. I'm being strategic." "You're being terrified. There's a difference." They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been miles. "I can't do this right now," Roderic said. "Can't do what? Have a conversation? Face your own fear? Admit that maybe, just maybe, your entire approach to life has been wrong? My approach kept this duchy stable for 12 years. Your approach created an environment so toxic that your most trusted advisor committed treason to escape it." The words hit like a physical blow. Roderic felt something crack inside him. Rage, fear, helplessness. All of it boiling up. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out. Leave. I need to think. Don't do this. Don't push me away because you're scared. I'm not scared. I'm being practical. You want emotional support. I need operational focus. Those things are incompatible. Those things are exactly compatible if you'd stop treating every relationship like a military operation. Everything is a military operation. That's what you don't understand. Every conversation, every alliance, every connection, all of it is strategic maneuvering, and the moment you forget that, you lose. Then you've already lost. Because you've turned yourself into exactly what Marcus accused you of being, a brilliant tactician incapable of being human. Maybe that's what this position requires. Then I pity you. She turned to leave, stopped at the door. For what it's worth, I don't regret last night. I don't regret believing you could change. But I also won't watch you destroy yourself by retreating back into isolation because one person betrayed you. If you want to be that man, the Duke who rules through fear and dies alone, that's your choice. But don't expect me to stay and witness it. She left. The door closed with quiet finality. Roderic stood in the library surrounded by books and silence and felt the last 3 months collapse. She was right. About everything. He was retreating, was rebuilding walls, was using Marcus's betrayal as justification to abandon the progress he'd made. Because it was easier, safer, more familiar. Isolation didn't hurt, didn't risk, didn't require the terrifying vulnerability of actually trusting someone, but it also meant losing her. And the thought of that, of Seraphine walking away, of returning to the empty control he'd maintained before she arrived, felt like suffocating. He had a choice to make. Retreat into safety and lose everything that mattered, or stay vulnerable and risk the exact betrayal he'd just experienced. Neither option was acceptable. Both options were inevitable. And for the first time in 12 years, Duke Roderic Vayne had absolutely no idea what the right strategic move was. Gott. The trial commenced at 3 as scheduled. The great hall was packed, every nobleman with influence, every courtier with access. Everyone wanted to witness the sentencing of Lord Ashford, and now, surprisingly, Chancellor Marcus Thorne. Roderic sat on the ducal throne, alone. Seraphine was absent, probably in her chambers, probably reconsidering every decision that had brought her to this moment. He didn't blame her. The evidence was presented systematically. Ashford's armed mobilization, Marcus's financial corruption, the conspiracy between them, all of it documented, verified, undeniable. The council voted unanimously for execution, both of them. Roderic should have felt satisfied. Justice served, traitors punished, order restored. Instead, he felt hollow. Lord Ashford and Chancellor Thorne, he said, voice carrying across the hall. You have been found guilty of treason against the Duchy of Blackthorn Vale. The sentence is death by execution, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Do you have any final words? Ashford said nothing, just glared with impotent rage. Marcus stood, looked directly at Roderic. I have something to say. The hall went silent. Your Grace, you are a brilliant man, tactically superior, strategically unmatched. You've built a duchy that functions with mechanical precision, but you've forgotten something fundamental. Power without purpose is just tyranny, and tyranny, no matter how efficient, eventually collapses under its own weight. He paused. The Duchess understands this. She's been trying to show you for 3 months, trying to rebuild what you've systematically destroyed. Human connection, actual loyalty. The kind of governance that makes people want to serve rather than fear punishment for not serving. Marcus's voice dropped. You're going to lose her. Not because she doesn't care, but because caring about someone requires being capable of caring back. And I don't think you are. I think Alara broke you so completely that you can't risk it again. Can't open yourself to that kind of pain. Roderic's hands tightened on the throne's armrests. And that, Your Grace, is the real tragedy. Not my betrayal. Not Ashford's failed coup, but the fact that you're so terrified of being hurt that you'll destroy the one good thing that's happened to you in 9 years. Guards, Roderic said. Remove them. They dragged both men away. The hall emptied slowly. Nobles whispering, speculation already building. Roderic sat alone on his throne and felt Marcus's words echo. You're going to lose her, not because she doesn't care, but because you can't care back. The accuracy of it was devastating, because Marcus was right. He was terrified. Absolutely paralyzed by the possibility that letting Seraphine matter would create the exact vulnerability that had destroyed him when Alara died. And his instinct was to eliminate the vulnerability by eliminating the connection. Push her away. Rebuild walls. Return to the safe isolation of absolute control. It was the smart move. The strategic move. The move that protected him from future pain. It was also the move that would cost him everything. He sat there as the evening shadows lengthened, trapped between 2 impossible choices, and finally understood what Seraphine had been trying to tell him for months. Power didn't require isolation. Fear required isolation. And he'd been so busy calling it strength that he'd never noticed the difference. Plug. He found her in the western wing, sitting by the window, staring out at the duchy she'd spent 3 months trying to improve. She didn't look up when he entered. I'm sorry, he said. For which part? Pushing me away? Accusing me of being a distraction? Or proving Marcus right about your inability to be human? All of it. Sorry doesn't fix this, Roderic. I know. Then why are you here? Because I'm terrified. The honesty of it made her turn. He stood in the doorway. Not hiding. Not deploying strategy. Just raw. I'm terrified that if I let you matter, I'll lose you. Terrified that caring about you creates a weakness someone will exploit. Terrified that opening myself up means 9 years of pain all over again. He took a step closer. But I'm more terrified of losing you because I was too much of a coward to try. Seraphine's eyes were wet. You hurt me today, she said quietly. Pushed me away right when you needed support most. Made me feel like everything we built was conditional on nothing ever going wrong. I know. And I was wrong. Marcus's betrayal triggered every defense mechanism I've developed. And I defaulted to isolation because it's familiar, because it's safe, because actual vulnerability requires more courage than I've had to deploy in 12 years. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. I don't know how to do this perfectly. Don't know how to be the husband you deserve, or the duke this duchy needs, or the man I want to be. But I know I want to try, even when it's terrifying, even when my instinct is to retreat. I want to keep trying. Why? Because you make me want to be better. Because losing you would hurt worse than anything Marcus or Ashford could have done. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, you became the thing I care about more than power or control or safety. Tears streamed down her face. You can't just say things like that and expect it to erase what happened. I know words aren't enough. I know I have to prove it. Show you through action that I'm committed to change. That last night wasn't temporary softness, but permanent transformation. How? By not pushing you away when things get hard. By including you in every major decision. By treating you as the partner you've earned the right to be, rather than the possession I tried to make you. He took her hands. By choosing you. Every day. Even when it's scary. Even when my instinct is to retreat. Choosing you over the walls I've built. Seraphine looked at their joined hands, then at him. You're asking me to trust you won't do this again. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove I've learned, to show you that Marcus was wrong, that I am capable of caring, of being human, of choosing connection over control. And if you fail, if the next crisis triggers the same retreat, then you call me on it. Force me to face it. Don't let me hide behind strategy and cold calculation. Make me be better. That's not my job, Roderic. I can't fix you. Only you can do that. I know, but I can't do it alone. I need you. Not as a crutch, but as a partner who won't accept my bullshit. Who'll push back when I'm being a coward. Who'll remind me that strength isn't isolation. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, this is going to be hard. I know. You're going to want to retreat sometimes. It's habit. It's survival mechanism. It's 12 years of conditioning. I know. And I won't tolerate being pushed away every time you get scared. I understand. You'll have to prove it, consistently, over time. Not just in this moment of clarity, but in the daily grind of actually living together. Yes. She pulled her hands free. He felt his heart stop. Then she reached up, cupped his face. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I'll try. I'll give you the chance to prove you mean this. But Roderic, yes? If you pull this again, if you retreat back into isolation because something goes wrong, I'm done. I won't spend my life fighting for scraps of humanity from someone who's determined to be a fortress. I deserve better than that. You do. You deserve so much better than what I've given you, and I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of you. She kissed him. Soft. Tentative. Like testing whether this was real. He kissed her back like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Because she was. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. We have a lot of work ahead of us, she whispered. I know. The duchy, the council, the aftermath of the betrayals, all of it. And us, especially us. She pulled back, looked at him seriously. Marcus and Ashford, their executions are tomorrow. Yes. Are you ready for that? Honestly? No. Marcus was with me for 8 years. Executing him feels like admitting I failed to see what was right in front of me. You didn't fail. He chose betrayal. That's on him. Is it, though? Or did I create an environment that made betrayal seem like the only option? Seraphine was quiet. Then, both things can be true. He chose his actions, but your governance style contributed to his motivations. The question is what you do with that understanding moving forward. Change, Roderic said. Actually change. Not just in how I treat you, but in how I run the duchy. Make space for dissent. Encourage honest feedback. Stop ruling through fear and start building through trust. That's ambitious. It's necessary. You've been trying to tell me that for months. Time I actually listened. She smiled. Small but genuine. Then we start tomorrow. After the executions. We rebuild. Together. Together, he agreed. They held each other as night fell over Blackthorn Vale. Two people trying to build something real from the ruins of what had been. It wouldn't be easy. Roderic's instincts were deeply ingrained. His fears were legitimate. The duchy's political landscape was still fractured and dangerous. But for the first time in 9 years, he wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. Dawn came cold and gray. The executions were held in the courtyard, public, witnessed. The kind of message that reminded everyone what happened to traitors. Roderic stood on the platform, Seraphine beside him, a united front. Ashford went first, defiant to the end. No last words, just hatred. The axe fell, quick, clean. Then Marcus. He looked at Roderic one last time, no anger, just sadness. I hope she's worth it, Marcus said quietly. She is. Then you've changed more than I gave you credit for. I'm glad. The duchy deserves better than what I tried to give it. The axe fell. It was done. Roderic stood there, watching his former chancellor's body being removed, and felt the finality of it settle. This was the cost of power, of change, of choosing a different path. People died. Loyalties fractured. The old order collapsed to make room for something new. The question was whether the new thing they built would be better. He looked at Seraphine. She was pale but composed, witnessing the brutal reality of ducal justice. This is what it means to rule, he said quietly. I know. Can you live with this? Can you? He thought about it. Really thought. I don't know. But I'm going to try. Try to build something where executions are rare rather than routine, where betrayal is the exception rather than the expectation, where people serve out of actual loyalty rather than fear. That's ambitious. You said that last night. It's still true. He took her hand. Then let's be ambitious together. They walked back into the castle, past the courtyard where 2 men had just died, past the great hall where his throne sat empty, past all the symbols of power and authority and absolute control. Into the future they'd build together. It wouldn't be perfect. Roderic would struggle with his instincts, would want to retreat when things got difficult, would default to control when fear overwhelmed him. But Seraphine would be there, pushing back, refusing to accept the fortress, demanding he be human even when it terrified him. And slowly, painfully slowly, he'd learn. Learn that power without connection was hollow, that strength without vulnerability was brittle, that ruling through fear created the exact betrayals he was trying to prevent. Learn that maybe, just maybe, the greatest risk wasn't opening himself to pain. It was living an entire life closed off from joy. The duchy watched their duke and duchess walk together, noticed the change, whispered about it. Some approved, some worried, some plotted, but all of them recognized something fundamental had shifted. The iron rule of Blackthorn Vale was transforming, and Duke Roderic Vayne, who'd spent 12 years proving he was invincible, was finally learning the most dangerous lesson of all. That the truest strength wasn't the power to control everything. It was the courage to let someone matter enough to destroy you, and trust them not to. That was the knife's edge they walked now. That was the gamble he'd chosen, and whether it would save him or ruin him remained to be seen. The bodies were barely cold when the first report arrived. Roderic and Seraphine had just returned to the castle's main hall, still processing the brutal finality of the executions, when Brennan burst through the doors. His uniform was torn. Blood streaked across his face. Not his blood. Your Grace, we have a situation. Roderic's entire body shifted, battle-ready in an instant, every soft thought evaporating under hard tactical necessity. Report. 3 noble houses, Ashford's allies. They've mobilized simultaneously. Lord Harwick from the south, Lady Margaret from the east, Count Thornfield from the north. Combined forces estimated at 500 soldiers. They're converging on Vanehold. Seraphine's hand found Roderic's arm. How is that possible? We just crushed Ashford's rebellion 2 days ago. This isn't continuation, Your Grace. This is retaliation. They're calling it justice for unlawful executions. Claiming the Duke has become a tyrant who murders nobles without proper trial. Roderic felt cold fury settle over him like armor. We held a trial, full council, unanimous verdict, everything by the book. They're saying the trial was a sham. That you executed your own chancellor to cover up administrative failures. That Ashford was eliminated for political opposition rather than actual treason. Political spin. Weaponized narrative. The kind of manipulation that turned legitimate justice into tyrannical excess in public perception. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Whoever orchestrated this understood propaganda better than military strategy. When do they arrive? Harwick's forces are 6 hours out. Margaret 8. Thornfield 10. If they coordinate properly, they'll have us surrounded by nightfall with overwhelming numbers. 500 against what remained of his garrison after the recent battle. Maybe 250 soldiers. 2-to-1 odds. Defensible if he had time to fortify. Catastrophic if they achieved full encirclement before he could establish proper defensive positions. Roderic walked to the nearest map, spread it across the table, started calculating. Seraphine watched him shift into pure tactical mode, saw the humanity drain away, replaced by cold strategic assessment, the fortress rebuilding in real time. She'd seen this before, recognized the pattern, and refused to let it happen. Roderic, she said firmly. He didn't look up. Continued marking positions on the map. We need to evacuate non-essential personnel. Secure the water supply, reinforce the eastern gates, send riders to allied houses for reinforcement even though they won't arrive in time. Standard siege protocol. Roderic. Brennan, I want every soldier battle-ready in 2 hours. Full armor. Maximum ammunition. Prepare for sustained defense. Your Grace. Roderic, look at me. The command in her voice made him stop. He looked up, met her eyes. She saw it immediately. The walls slamming back into place, the distance returning. The man she'd started to reach disappearing behind the Duke, who ruled through absolute control. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't retreat into the machine. Don't use this crisis as an excuse to become that man again. We're facing 500 soldiers and potential annihilation. This isn't the time for emotional processing. This is exactly the time, because the decisions you make in the next 6 hours will define what kind of Duke you are, what kind of man you are. I'm the kind of man who keeps people alive. By making them expendable, by treating them as tactical assets rather than lives that matter. The brutality of the question landed hard. Roderic's jaw tightened. What do you want from me, Seraphine? We're outnumbered 2-to-1 with enemy forces closing from 3 directions. I need to think strategically. Think strategically, yes, but not in isolation. You have advisors. You have me. Use us. You're not a military strategist. No, but I know these nobles. I've spent 3 months building relationships in their territories. Harwick's daughter attends the school I funded. Margaret's villages received the medical supplies I negotiated. Thornfield's farmers used the equipment I subsidized. Roderic stared at her, processing. You're saying they might listen to you. I'm saying they might hesitate if they understand the full picture. Right now, they're operating on propaganda. Someone told them you're a tyrant, showed them selective evidence, manipulated their perception. So we counter with truth. We counter with me. Let me ride out under flag of truce. Talk to them. Show them what actually happened. Give them the choice to stand down before blood is spilled. Absolutely not. The response was immediate, visceral, non-negotiable. Seraphine stepped closer. Why not? Because it's too dangerous. Because they could take you hostage. Because I won't risk you like that. But you'll risk 250 soldiers in a battle we might lose? That's different. How? Because they're soldiers, it's their job. What? Your wife? Your vulnerability? The thing you're terrified of losing? She wasn't wrong. The thought of Seraphine riding out to face 500 soldiers, of her being captured or hurt or used against him made his blood run cold. But she was also right. They needed every possible advantage. and her relationships in those territories were an advantage he'd be stupid to ignore. This is what power requires sometimes. Not the ability to crush opposition through force, but the wisdom to know when diplomacy serves better than warfare. To understand that strength isn't always about the willingness to fight, but about the courage to risk what matters most for the greater good. The calculation was brutal. The choice, impossible. Send her and risk her life. Keep her here and guarantee catastrophic casualties. Neither option acceptable. Both options necessary. Roderic looked at Brennan. How much time before Harwick arrives? 6 hours. Maybe 5 if he pushes hard. And the others? Margaret within 8. Thornfield 10. So if someone could reach Harwick first, convince him to stand down, that's 1/3 of the force eliminated before coordination happens. Exactly, Your Grace. He turned back to Seraphine. You'd need an escort, full guard, weapons, clear extraction plan if things go wrong. I'd need your trust, she said, and a letter. Your official account of what happened, evidence they can verify, something that contradicts whatever narrative they've been fed. I can provide that. Then I'm going. Seraphine, we don't have time to argue. You know I'm right. You know this is the best tactical option. So stop treating me like something fragile and start treating me like the partner you said you wanted. The words hit like a slap, because she was right. He'd promised partnership, promised to stop pushing her away when things got difficult, promised to choose connection over control. 2 hours after that promise, and he was already defaulting to protective isolation. The pattern was so deeply ingrained he hadn't even noticed. Fine, he said, but you take 20 soldiers, best fighters we have. And if anything feels wrong, you retreat immediately. Agreed. I mean it, Seraphine. At the first sign of hostility, you run. I understand. Promise me. I promise. He pulled her close, kissed her hard, like he was trying to memorize the feeling in case it was the last time. When he pulled back, his eyes were storm dark. Come back to me. Always. She left with her escort 10 minutes later. 20 soldiers, full armor, carrying Roderic's official account and documentation of the trial. Roderic watched from the battlements until she disappeared from view. Then turned to Brennan. Fortify everything. I want this castle defendable against an army twice our size. Because if she doesn't succeed, that's exactly what we're facing. Yes, Your Grace. And Brennan? Yes. If she doesn't come back, if they hurt her, I will burn all 3 of those noble houses to ash and salt the earth where they stood. The cold certainty in his voice made Brennan's spine straighten. Understood, Your Grace. Roderic returned to the war room and did what he did best. Planned, calculated, prepared for every possible outcome. But underneath the tactical assessment, underneath the strategic positioning, a new thought was forming. If Seraphine died because he'd sent her into danger, because he'd chosen tactical advantage over her safety, would he survive it? Not physically, emotionally. Would he be able to function, or would the loss break him so completely that even his legendary control couldn't hold? He didn't know, and that uncertainty was more terrifying than 500 enemy soldiers. Seraphine reached Harwick's advancing forces 3 hours later. They were moving fast, disciplined, well-equipped, the kind of force that suggested serious planning and significant resources. Someone had funded this, someone with deep pockets and deeper grudges. She rode forward under white flag, her escort fanned out behind her, ready to protect, ready to retreat if necessary. A rider broke from Harwick's formation, approached cautiously. Your Grace, the rider said. Lord Harwick was not expecting the Duchess. I need to speak with him, immediately. This is urgent. Lord Harwick is under orders not to negotiate until... I don't care what his orders are. Tell him the Duchess of Blackthorn Vale requests parley under flag of truce. Tell him I have information about yesterday's executions that contradicts what he's been told. And tell him if he values truth over propaganda, he'll hear me out. The rider hesitated, then nodded and rode back. 5 minutes later, Lord Harwick himself approached. Mid-50s, gray-bearded, wearing full armor that looked expensive and well-maintained. Your Grace, he said, voice neutral. This is unexpected. I imagine it is. Can we talk? My orders are clear. March on Vanehold. Demand the Duke answer for unlawful executions. If he refuses, lay siege. Who gave you those orders? That's not your concern. It is if those orders are based on false information. Harwick's eyes narrowed. Explain. The executions were lawful. Full trial. Full counsel. Unanimous guilty verdict on charges of treason. Both men, Lord Ashford and Chancellor Marcus Thorne, were caught with documented evidence of conspiracy against the duchy. That's not what we were told. What were you told? That the Duke murdered his chancellor to cover administrative corruption, that Lord Ashford was executed for political opposition, that Vanehold has become a tyranny that eliminates anyone who challenges ducal authority. And you believe that? The evidence was compelling. What evidence? Harwick reached into his saddlebag, pulled out documents, handed them over. Seraphine read quickly. Her blood ran cold. Financial records showing Marcus reporting corruption. Letters allegedly from Ashford requesting investigation. Witness statements claiming the trial was a sham conducted without proper representation. All of it fabricated. Expertly. Professionally. The kind of forgery that would convince anyone who didn't have access to the actual trial documentation. This is propaganda, she said. Carefully constructed lies designed to turn you against the Duke. Or it's the truth and you're trying to protect your husband. Then verify it. I have the actual trial records. The real financial evidence. Testimony from council members who voted. All of it documented and verifiable. She handed over the documents Roderic had prepared. Harwick read slowly, carefully. His expression darkened. If this is accurate, he said finally, then someone has deliberately misled us. Not someone. Multiple someones. This level of coordination requires resources and planning. Someone wanted you mobilized, wanted you attacking Vanehold. The question is who benefits from noble houses destroying each other? Harwick was quiet for a long moment. Then, your daughter, Seraphine said. Elizabeth. She attends the school in your Eastern Territory. How do you know that? Because I funded its reconstruction 3 months ago. Replaced the roof, updated the materials, hired 2 additional teachers. Your daughter is excelling in mathematics. Harwick stared at her. Why would you do that? Because the school needed it. Because children deserve proper education regardless of political boundaries. Because that's what a duchess does. The Duke doesn't care about those things. The Duke didn't. But I do. And slowly, I'm teaching him to care too. You're asking me to believe he's changed. I'm asking you to verify before you commit to war. Talk to your daughter. Ask her about the school. Ask the villagers about the improvements. See if the tyrannical Duke is oppressing people, or if maybe, just maybe, the real threat is whoever manufactured these lies. And if I verify and it's true, then you make a choice. Join the propaganda or join the truth. Harwick studied her, really looked, saw the conviction, the honesty, the absolute certainty. I'll need time to verify, he said. You have 3 hours. After that, Margaret and Thornfield arrive, and this turns into actual war. Understood. He turned his horse, rode back to his forces. Seraphine watched him go and felt her heart hammering. That was 1. 2 more to convince, and only hours to do it. Roderic received word 2 hours later. Harwick has halted his advance. He's verifying information. No guarantee he'll stand down, but he's not attacking immediately. The relief was visceral. She'd done it. Had convinced a hostile noble to pause, to question, to verify rather than blindly attack. 1/3 of the threat neutralized. For now. What about Margaret and Thornfield? Margaret is 4 hours out. Thornfield 6. The Duchess is attempting to reach Margaret next. Roderic nodded, returned to his preparations. But something had shifted, not his tactical focus. That remained sharp. But underneath it, a new understanding. Seraphine was out there, risking her life, negotiating with hostile forces, doing work he couldn't do because his reputation preceded him. She was saving the duchy in ways he never could, and that realization was both humbling and terrifying, because it meant he needed her, not just wanted, needed. Her skills, her perspective, her ability to connect with people in ways he'd systematically destroyed in himself. She made him better, made the duchy better, made everything better, and if she died doing this, he cut the thought off, refused to follow it. She'd promised to come back. He had to trust that, had to trust her. The hardest thing he'd ever done was not riding out to protect her, not taking control, not reverting to the instinct that said if he personally handled everything, outcomes were guaranteed. Instead, he stayed, prepared, and trusted his wife to handle what he couldn't. It was agony. It was necessary. It was what partnership actually meant. Seraphine reached Margaret's forces as the sun began its descent. Lady Margaret was different from Harwick. Younger, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and sharper-tongued. The kind of woman who'd clawed her way to power in a male-dominated nobility and had the scars to prove it. "Your Grace," Margaret said, voice cold. "You're either very brave or very foolish riding out here. Possibly both. But I need you to hear the truth before you commit to something you'll regret." "The truth?" "The truth is your husband executed 2 noblemen without proper justification. The truth is my husband executed 2 traitors after a full legal trial with unanimous council verdict. Everything else is propaganda." She handed over the documentation. Margaret read, face impassive. Then, "These could be fabricated." "They could be. So could the documents you received claiming otherwise. The question is which source you trust. I don't trust either. I trust evidence." "Good. Then investigate. Your villages received medical supplies 3 months ago. Supplies I negotiated and delivered personally. Talk to your people. Ask them if the tyrannical Duchess was oppressing them or helping them." "Why would you help my territories?" "Because they needed help. Because I had the resources and authority to provide it. Because that's what governance should be." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're either genuine or an excellent manipulator. Why can't I be both?" That got a smile. Brief, sharp, fair point. She looked at the documents again. "If I verify and this is accurate, what do you want? Stand down. Don't attack Vaynehold. Give us a chance to find whoever orchestrated this before more blood is spilled. And if I don't, then we fight. And people die. And whoever manipulated all of us wins because we destroy each other while they watch." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll verify. But your Grace, understand something. If this is a trick, if you're lying to buy time, I will personally ensure Vaynehold falls." "I understand. And I'm not lying. We'll see." Margaret turned her horse, rode back, 2 down, 1 to go. But the sun was setting, and Thornfield would arrive soon, and time was running out. Count Thornfield was a problem. Unlike Harwick and Margaret, he didn't stop to talk, didn't slow his advance, didn't respond to white flags. He just kept coming. Seraphine's escort captain, Thomas, rode up beside her. "Your Grace, he's not stopping. We need to retreat, not yet. Your Grace." "I said not yet." She pushed her horse forward, directly into Thornfield's path, forced him to either stop or run her down. He stopped. Barely. Count Thornfield was old, 60s at least, but he carried himself with rigid military bearing, the kind of man who'd spent a lifetime in service and had strong opinions about honor and duty. "Move, Duchess," he said, voice like gravel. "Not until you hear me out. I don't negotiate with tyrants or their accomplices. I'm not asking you to negotiate. I'm asking you to verify before you attack. There's nothing to verify. Your husband murdered 2 nobles. That's unacceptable regardless of justification. Even if they committed treason, there was no treason. Only political opposition. How do you know? Because I knew Marcus Thorne, served with him years ago. He was a good man, honorable. He wouldn't commit treason. Good men make bad choices when they're motivated by revenge. Marcus's sister was rejected by the previous duke. He carried that grudge for decades, used his position to feed intelligence to enemies, got caught, faced consequences. Thornfield's face reddened. "You're lying. I'm stating documented facts. Facts you can verify if you'd stop charging forward long enough to actually investigate. Investigation is for courts. I'm here for justice. Justice without truth is just revenge. And revenge makes you no better than what you're accusing us of being." Thornfield's hand dropped to his sword hilt. Thomas and the other guards shifted, ready to defend. The tension was a living thing. One wrong move, and this would explode into violence. Seraphine held her ground, didn't reach for weapons, didn't retreat, just looked Thornfield in the eyes and spoke quietly. "I know you're angry. I know you believe you're doing the right thing, but I'm asking you to pause. Verify. Talk to the farmers who benefited from the equipment I subsidized. Talk to the people who've seen actual governance improvement over the past 3 months. See if the tyranny you're expecting actually exists. Why should I trust anything you say? Because I'm risking my life riding out here instead of hiding behind castle walls. Because I could be safe right now, and instead I'm facing down your army. Does that seem like the action of someone perpetuating tyranny? It seems like desperation. Maybe. Or maybe it's conviction. Maybe it's someone who believes truth matters more than winning. Thornfield stared at her. Long. Hard. Then, finally, you have 1 hour. I'll verify with local sources. If your claims don't match reality, I attack. Fair enough. And Duchess? Yes? If you're lying, if this is manipulation, I will show no mercy. I wouldn't expect any. He rode away. Seraphine sat on her horse, shaking. Adrenaline crashing now that the immediate threat had passed. Thomas moved beside her. That was either very brave or very stupid, Your Grace, probably both. But we bought time. Will he actually verify? He's military, honor-bound. If he says he'll verify, he will. And if he doesn't like what he finds, then we have a problem. They rode back toward Vanehold as darkness fell. Behind them, 3 armies waited, verifying, investigating, deciding whether to believe propaganda or truth. And somewhere in the shadows, whoever had orchestrated this was watching, waiting to see if their manipulation would succeed. Roderic was waiting at the gates when Seraphine returned. He didn't say anything, just pulled her off her horse and into his arms, held her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I thought I lost you, he said quietly. Not yet. I'm harder to kill than I look. Don't joke. Please don't joke about this. She pulled back, looked at his face, saw genuine fear there. Not the cold calculation, not the strategic concern, actual human terror. I'm okay, she said softly. I convinced all 3 to verify before attacking. We have time. How much time? Hours. Maybe until morning if we're lucky. And if the verification doesn't go our way, then we fight. But at least we tried diplomacy first. He kissed her, hard, desperate, like he was trying to convince himself she was real. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. I can't lose you, he said. I know that's selfish. I know we're facing potential war. I know hundreds of lives hang in the balance. But I can't lose you. You won't. You don't know that. No, but I choose to believe it anyway, because the alternative is paralysis. And we don't have time for paralysis. She was right, as always. Roderic took a breath, steadied himself. What do you need? Food. Water. About 12 hours of sleep that I won't get. And an update on our defensive positions. They're as fortified as possible given the time constraints. If it comes to battle, we can hold for maybe 3 days before supplies become critical. Then we pray the verification goes well. I don't pray. Then I'll pray enough for both of us. She walked into the castle, exhausted, dirty, magnificent. Roderic watched her go and felt something crystallize. He'd been wrong about everything. About power. About control. About what strength actually meant. Real strength wasn't the ability to crush enemies. It was the courage to trust allies, to delegate, to admit you couldn't do everything alone. Real power wasn't commanding fear. It was inspiring loyalty. Real leadership wasn't isolation. It was partnership. Seraphine had been trying to teach him that for months, and he'd been too terrified to listen. Well, he was listening now, and if they survived this, if they made it through the next 24 hours, he was going to rebuild this duchy on those principles. Not rule through fear, lead through trust, not command through isolation, govern through connection, not destroy opposition, convert it. Ambitious, possibly naive, definitely terrifying. But watching Seraphine face down 3 armies with nothing but truth and conviction had shown him something. That approach worked, actually worked, better than his 12 years of iron control had ever managed. Time to learn from it. Time to change. Actually change, permanently, if he survived long enough. The word came at midnight. Harwick had verified, stood down, withdrawn his forces, sent a formal apology and request for alliance meeting. 1 down, 2 to go. Margaret's response arrived an hour later. Verification complete. Claims accurate. Standing down. Requesting investigation into who provided false intelligence. 2 down, 1 to go. Thornfield's response came at dawn. Roderic was in the war room when the messenger arrived. Bloodied, exhausted, barely standing. Message from Count Thornfield, the messenger gasped. Roderic took the sealed letter, opened it, read it once, twice, then crushed it in his fist. What does it say? Brennan asked. It says, Count Thornfield verified our claims. confirmed we were telling the truth, and decided he doesn't care. What? His exact words. The Duke of Blackthorn Vale has ruled through fear and intimidation for 12 years. Even if these particular executions were justified, the pattern of tyrannical governance remains. This is an opportunity to remove a corrupted leader and install better governance. I will not waste it. So he's attacking anyway. And he's positioned himself between Harwick and Margaret. If they try to come to our aid, they'll have to go through him first. How many soldiers? 200. Against our 250. Nearly even odds. Except we're inside fortifications and he's attacking. Defensible. Winnable even. But costly. Roderic looked at the map. At the duchy, he'd spent 12 years building. At the power structure he'd maintained through absolute control. All of it coming down because one old soldier decided past behavior justified present action. And the worst part? Thornfield wasn't entirely wrong. Roderic had ruled through fear, had intimidated, had eliminated opposition ruthlessly. That was the foundation he'd built. And now it was collapsing under its own weight. The irony was devastating. "Where's the Duchess?" he asked. "Resting." Finally. "She's been awake for 24 hours straight. Let her rest. She's done enough." He walked to the window, looked out at the approaching dawn. At Count Thornfield's forces visible in the distance, setting up siege positions. This was it. The moment everything came down to. Fight and win, but prove Thornfield right about violent governance. Or find another way. Some path that didn't end in bloodshed and validated accusations of tyranny. There had to be a third option. Some strategic solution he was missing. He just couldn't see it. Behind him, Brennan cleared his throat. "Your Grace, the soldiers are asking for orders. Do we prepare for full defensive engagement?" Roderic didn't answer immediately, because preparing for defensive engagement meant accepting this battle was inevitable, meant hundreds of deaths, meant proving to everyone watching that the Duke of Blackthorn Vale's only solution to opposition was violence. But not preparing meant leaving the duchy vulnerable. Meant gambling everything on a solution he hadn't found yet. Impossible choice, no good options. And then the door burst open. Seraphine stood there, still in yesterday's clothes, hair disheveled, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't I dare what?" "Fight this battle. Kill those soldiers. Prove Thornfield right about everything he's accused you of being. What choice do I have? He's attacking regardless of truth, regardless of evidence. He's decided I'm a tyrant, and this is his chance to remove me. So prove him wrong." "How?" She walked to the map, stared at it, thinking. Then, "You go out there." "What?" "You ride out under white flag, alone, and you surrender." "Absolutely not." "Listen to me. Thornfield doesn't want war. He wants justice. He wants accountability for 12 years of tyrannical rule. Give it to him. By surrendering, by abdicating, by submitting to judgment. Let him bring formal charges. Let an independent tribunal investigate. Let the duchy's nobles determine if your governance has been tyrannical or necessary. They'll find me guilty. You know they will. Maybe. Or maybe when forced to actually examine the evidence, when made to look at outcomes rather than perception, they'll see what I see. A duke who made hard choices in difficult circumstances. Who maintained stability when others would have let it crumble. Who's been trying to change, and if they don't, if they decide I'm guilty and demand abdication or execution, then you face those consequences. Because that's what actual leadership looks like. Not demanding loyalty through fear, earning trust through accountability. Roderic stared at her. "You're asking me to put my life in the hands of nobles who have every reason to want me gone? I'm asking you to prove you trust the system you claim to represent, to show that you believe in justice, not just power." The room was silent, every officer watching, because this was the moment, the choice that would define everything, maintain control through force, or surrender control and trust in something he'd never believed in. Justice. Brennan spoke quietly. "Your Grace, if you do this, if you surrender, you lose all tactical advantage. If the tribunal finds against you, you have no recourse, no defense. I know. It's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only path that doesn't end in proving Thornfield right." Seraphine moved beside him, took his hand. "You asked me yesterday what real strength looks like. This is it. Not the ability to crush opposition. The courage to submit to judgment and trust that truth matters. And if truth isn't enough, then at least we tried. At least we showed the duchy a different kind of leadership, one that valued justice over power. Roderic looked at her, at the woman who'd ridden out to face armies for him, who'd risked everything because she believed truth mattered, who was asking him to do the same. Every instinct screamed no, screamed to fortify, to fight, to maintain control through overwhelming force. But those instincts had created this situation, had made enemies who refused to believe he could change. Time to prove them wrong, even if it killed him. Fine, he said. I'll do it. The relief in Seraphine's face was immediate, but Roderic looked at Brennan. If this goes wrong, if they execute me or force abdication, you protect her. You make sure the Duchess has safe passage to whatever territory will take her. You ensure she survives this. Your Grace, that's an order. Yes, Your Grace. Roderic turned back to Seraphine. This is insane, you know that? Completely. But it's also right. Right doesn't always win. No, but we have to try anyway. He kissed her, soft, final, like he was memorizing the moment. When he pulled back, his eyes were clear. I love you, he said. First time he'd said it, first time he'd admitted it out loud. Seraphine's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. Come back to me. I'll try. He turned to his officers. Send word to Count Thornfield. Tell him the Duke of Blackthorn Vale requests parley. Tell him I'm willing to submit to independent tribunal judgment on all accusations of tyrannical governance. Tell him I'll ride out alone to discuss terms. The room exploded into protest. Your Grace, that's suicide. Your Grace, you can't. Your Grace, let us fight instead. Roderic raised his hand. Silence fell. This is my decision, my responsibility, my consequence to face. He looked at each of them. You've served me well, all of you. Better than I deserved. If this goes badly, if I don't return, you follow the Duchess's leadership. She's proven herself more capable than I ever gave her credit for. Trust her. Your Grace, that's all. Prepare my horse. White flag. No weapons. I ride out in 1 hour. They left. Reluctantly, fearfully. Only Seraphine remained. She moved into his arms, held him. You're the bravest person I know, she whispered. I'm terrified. That's what makes it brave. They stood there, together, facing the impossible choice. And for the first time in 12 years, Duke Roderic Vayne felt at peace, not because he knew the outcome, but because he'd finally made a choice based on what was right rather than what was safe. That was growth. That was change. That was everything Seraphine had been trying to teach him. Whether it would save him remained to be seen, but at least he'd tried. At least he'd shown the duchy, shown himself, that he was more than the tyrant they feared. He was a man, flawed, trying, willing to face consequences. And that was enough. It had to be. Because in 1 hour, he'd ride out to meet Count Thornfield, and whatever happened next would determine the fate of Blackthorn Vale, and his life. And everything he'd spent 12 years building, the moment stretched, crystallized, became the point where everything changed. Roderic Vayne, Duke of Blackthorn Vale, walked toward the stables, toward judgment, toward an unknown future. And for the first time in his life, he walked toward it without walls, without armor, without the cold protection of absolute control, just himself, vulnerable, human, terrified, but no longer alone, because Seraphine would be watching, waiting, hoping, and that was worth any risk, worth everything. He mounted his horse, took the white flag, rode toward Count Thornfield's forces, toward a reckoning 12 years in the making, toward the moment that would define whether change was possible, or whether the past always won. The distance between Vanehold's gates and Count Thornfield's encampment was barely a mile. Roderic covered it in silence, white flag streaming behind him, morning light turning everything sharp and unforgiving. No escort, no weapons, no armor beyond what he wore underneath his formal coat. Just himself and a choice that could end everything. He could see Thornfield's soldiers watching his approach, 200 men arranged in perfect military formation, disciplined, ready. The kind of force that suggested the Count had been planning this for longer than a few days. Someone had been coordinating. Someone with resources and patience. Someone who understood that attacking Roderic Vayne required more than just force. It required narrative, justification, the moral high ground. They'd manufactured it perfectly. And now Roderic was riding directly into the trap, betting everything that truth could cut through propaganda. Insane. Possibly suicidal. Absolutely necessary. Because the alternative was proving them right. Proving that the Duke of Blackthorn Vale's only answer to opposition was violence. He'd spent 12 years building that reputation. Time to dismantle it, even if it killed him. Thornfield waited at the center of his formation, still mounted, still armored. The morning sun caught on polished steel and turned him into something almost mythic. The righteous warrior confronting the tyrant. The optics were perfect. Roderic stopped 10 feet away, dismounted, dropped to one knee. The gesture sent a shockwave through both armies. The Duke of Blackthorn Vale. Kneeling, submitting. Unthinkable. Unprecedented. Absolutely calculated to disrupt Thornfield's narrative. Because tyrants didn't kneel, didn't submit, didn't offer themselves for judgment. Count Thornfield, Roderic said, voice carrying across the field. I come unarmed and under flag of truce. I submit myself to your judgment and request formal tribunal on all accusations of tyrannical governance. Thornfield's expression didn't change. Stand up. Roderic stood, met the old soldier's eyes. This is a trick, Thornfield said flatly. No trick. I'm offering accountability. Full investigation. Independent tribunal comprised of nobles from territories I don't control. Complete transparency. Why? Because my wife convinced me that truth matters more than power. That justice is worth risking everything for. That maybe, just maybe, the duchy deserves better than a duke who rules through fear. Thornfield's jaw tightened. Pretty words. Your father said pretty words too. Before he destroyed my sister's life. The connection clicked into place. Your sister. Elena. Marcus Thorne's sister. The same. My baby sister who loved your father with everything she had. Who was promised marriage and then discarded for political alliance. Who died alone and heartbroken because the Vayne family treats people as chess pieces. I'm not my father. No, you're worse. He at least had the decency to feel guilt. You've spent 12 years perfecting cruelty into an art form. The accusation landed heavy, true in ways that made Roderic's chest tighten. Because Thornfield wasn't entirely wrong. He had ruled cruelly, had prioritized control over compassion, had treated people as assets rather than humans. That was the foundation he'd built, the legacy he'd created, and now he was facing the consequences. The question is whether that legacy defines who I am permanently, Roderic said quietly, or whether change is possible. Change? You've had 12 years to change, and it took a woman with more courage than I've ever possessed to finally break through my walls, to show me what I'd become, to demand I be better, touching, but irrelevant. Your personal growth doesn't erase 12 years of damage. You're right, it doesn't, but it might prevent the next 12 years from being the same. Thornfield dismounted, walked closer, stopped 3 feet from Roderic. Up close, the old soldier's face was weathered and hard. Eyes that had seen too much, carried too many grudges. You want a tribunal? He said. Fine, but understand something, Duke. I've spent years documenting your abuses, collecting testimony, building an airtight case. When that tribunal convenes, when all your actions are laid bare, you will be found guilty. Possibly. Or possibly when forced to examine context, the duchy I inherited, the threats I faced, the decisions required to maintain stability, they'll see something more complicated than simple tyranny. There's nothing complicated about fear-based governance, isn't there? Fear is a tool. Sometimes it's the only tool that works. The question is whether it's deployed strategically or sadistically. A distinction without difference to those who suffer under it. Maybe. Or maybe the difference is whether the person wielding it can evolve beyond it. They stared at each other. Old warrior and younger duke. Generations of grievance and fresh attempts at redemption. Then Thornfield spoke. I'll grant your tribunal, but on my conditions, which are neutral territory, equal representation from all major houses, complete access to all ducal records, no interference from you or your people. Agreed. And if found guilty of systematic tyranny, you abdicate immediately. No appeals, no negotiations. Agreed. The finality of it hung in the air, because if the tribunal found against him, and Thornfield clearly believed they would, Roderic would lose everything, the duchy, the title, the power he'd spent 12 years building, everything except Seraphine. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the whole point. Power without purpose was hollow. Control without connection was empty. He'd learned that the hard way. Better to risk losing everything than keep living as the man he'd been. "When do we convene?" Roderic asked. "1 week. That gives time for representatives to arrive, for evidence to be compiled, for you to prepare whatever defense you think will save you." "I don't need a defense. I need the truth to be heard. We'll see if truth is enough." Thornfield turned, walked back to his horse, then stopped. "One more thing, Duke." "Yes?" "Your Duchess, the one who rode out yesterday, who convinced Harwick and Margaret to stand down. What about her? She's either remarkably brave or remarkably naive. I haven't decided which. She's both. And she's the only reason I'm standing here instead of preparing to fight you." Thornfield nodded slowly. "Then you're a luckier man than you deserve to be." "I know." The old soldier mounted, gave orders. His forces began packing, preparing to withdraw to neutral ground for the tribunal. Roderic stood there, watching them go, and felt the weight of the past week crash down. He'd lost his chancellor to betrayal, nearly lost his wife to his own fear, faced 3 simultaneous rebellions, and now was gambling his entire legacy on the hope that accountability mattered more than power. Exhausting, terrifying, absolutely necessary. Behind him, he heard hoofbeats, turned to find Seraphine riding out. Alone, no escort, just her and a horse, and that stubborn determination that had saved him more times than he could count. She dismounted, walked to him. "Well?" "Tribunal in 1 week, neutral territory. If they find me guilty of systematic tyranny, I abdicate." She took his hands. "Are you okay with that?" "Honestly, I don't know. Losing the duchy, losing the power, that should terrify me. It does terrify me, but somehow it doesn't feel like losing. It feels like freedom." "Freedom from what?" "From the expectations. The role. The need to be the Iron Duke who never shows weakness. If they force abdication, maybe I get to just be me." "And who is that?" "I'm still figuring it out. But whoever he is, he's better with you than without you." She kissed him, soft, real, like sealing a promise. "Then we figure it out together. Duke or not, title or not, power or not." "Together," he agreed. They rode back to Vanehold side by side, no longer Duke and Duchess performing for the court. Just 2 people facing an uncertain future and choosing to face it as partners. The castle saw them return, saw the white flag, saw them together, and understood something had fundamentally changed. Bye. The week before the tribunal was organized chaos. Representatives arrived from every major house, some sympathetic, some hostile. All of them intensely curious about whether the Duke of Blackthorn Vale would actually submit to judgment or if this was elaborate political theater. Roderic spent days organizing records, financial documents, military reports, correspondence. Every decision he'd made over 12 years laid out for scrutiny. It was brutal, seeing it all compiled. The executions, the exiles, the harsh penalties, the systematic elimination of opposition. In context, each decision made sense. Protected stability, prevented chaos, maintained order. Out of context, they looked exactly like what Thornfield accused him of: tyranny, pure and simple. The question was whether the tribunal would see context or just outcomes. Seraphine worked beside him, not defending, not justifying, just organizing, making sure the complete picture was available. "Some of these are bad," she said one night, reviewing execution records. "I know, like really bad. Lord Kensington's exile for verbal opposition. That's excessive. It prevented a potential alliance between 3 hostile houses. It also terrified everyone into silence." "Yes." She looked at him. "Do you regret it?" Roderic was quiet for a long time. Then, "I regret that it was necessary, or that I believed it was necessary. I regret not looking for other options. I regret letting fear drive decisions instead of wisdom. That's growth. That's too late. Maybe. Or maybe it's right on time." The night before the tribunal, Roderic couldn't sleep. He stood on the battlements, looking out over the duchy he'd ruled for 12 years, and wondered if this was the last time he'd see it as Duke. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, 12 years of governance would be judged by people who had every reason to want him gone. He should be terrified, should be strategizing, should be preparing defensive arguments. Instead, He felt calm, almost peaceful, because regardless of the outcome, he'd made the right choice, had chosen accountability over control, truth over power, justice over fear. That was worth the risk. Footsteps behind him, Seraphine's presence settling beside him like she belonged there, which she did. Can't sleep? She asked. Too much to think about. Want to talk about it? Not really, just want to. Well, be with you before everything changes. She leaned against him. They stood in silence, watching stars appear over Blackthorn Vale. After a while, she spoke. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Even if I lose everything, especially if you lose everything, because it means you chose integrity over power. That's harder than winning any battle. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. That's what makes it brave. He pulled her close, held her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. I love you, he said. Whatever happens, whatever the tribunal decides, I need you to know that. You changed me, saved me, made me want to be better. I love you too, and whatever happens, we face it together. Together, he agreed. They stayed there until dawn. Two people standing on the edge of massive change, uncertain, terrified, together, and that was enough. Ikit. The tribunal convened in neutral territory, a grand hall that belonged to no single house, representatives from 15 major families, Thornfield as primary accuser, a panel of 3 senior nobles as judges. Formal, official, absolutely terrifying. Roderic entered alone. No advisors, no supporters. Just himself and 12 years of documented governance. Seraphine sat in the gallery, watching, waiting, her presence a steady anchor. The chief judge, Lord Ashton, spoke first. Duke Roderic Vayne of Blackthorn Vale. You stand accused of systematic tyranny, abuse of ducal authority, and governance through fear rather than justice. How do you plead? The room went silent. Every eye on Roderic. This was the moment, the choice. Defend or admit, fight or submit. He took a breath. Guilty, he said. The room exploded, representatives shouting, judges calling for order. Thornfield looking shocked because tyrants didn't plead guilty, didn't admit fault, didn't surrender the moral high ground. But Roderic wasn't done. Lord Ashton raised his hand. Silence fell slowly. You plead guilty? To some charges, yes. I have ruled through fear, have made decisions prioritizing stability over compassion, have eliminated opposition through exile and execution. All of that is documented and accurate. He paused. But I plead context as well. I inherited a duchy on the verge of collapse, fractured alliances, hostile neighbors, internal corruption. My father's weakness had created vulnerabilities that enemies were actively exploiting. So you became a tyrant to prevent chaos. I became what I believed was necessary to prevent collapse. Whether that crossed into tyranny is for you to decide. But I ask that you examine not just my actions, but the circumstances that prompted them. Convenient excuse, Thornfield said. Every tyrant claims necessity, not excuse. Context. There's a difference. Roderic walked to the table. Spread out documentation. Year 1 of my rule. 3 assassination attempts. 2 attempted coups. 5 major houses threatening secession. I responded with overwhelming force. Executed the plotters. Exiled their families. Established that challenging ducal authority meant absolute consequences. He looked at the judges. Tyrannical? Yes. Necessary? Also yes. The duchy stabilized. Threats diminished. Order was restored. At what cost? Thornfield demanded. At the cost of fear. Of loyalty bought through intimidation rather than earned through trust. Of a governance structure that worked but couldn't evolve. So you admit you were wrong. I admit I was incomplete. My approach worked for stabilization, but it failed at building anything sustainable. Failed at creating genuine loyalty. Failed at making the duchy something worth serving rather than something to fear. Then why didn't you change? Because I didn't know how. Because the man I became after my father's failures and after losing the woman I loved was someone who believed connection was weakness, that vulnerability invited exploitation, that power required isolation. And now? Now I understand I was wrong. That real strength is vulnerability, that actual power is earned trust, That governance without humanity is just organized cruelty. He turned to face Thornfield directly. Your sister, Elena. What happened to her was wrong. My father's choice to prioritize political alliance over genuine feeling caused real damage. And I compounded that damage by becoming exactly the kind of leader who would make that same choice, who would treat people as tools rather than humans. The old soldier's face was stone. I'm sorry, Roderic said, for what my father did, for what I became, for every person who suffered under governance that valued order over humanity. I'm sorry, and I'm trying to change, trying to be better, trying to build something that doesn't require fear to function. The room was silent. Then Thornfield spoke. Pretty words, Duke, but words are easy. Actions matter. Show me one decision, one single choice in 12 years, where you prioritized humanity over power, Roderic thought. Then, last week, when your forces were approaching, I had the tactical advantage, fortified position, nearly even numbers, good odds of victory in direct combat. So I chose diplomacy over violence, sent my wife to negotiate, risked her safety, risked my strategic position, all because the cost of winning through force was proving you right about what I'd become. That's one decision, one moment of weakness, one moment of growth. And there are others, small changes over the past 3 months, approving Seraphine's infrastructure projects, including her in governance, allowing dissent in council meetings, learning to see people as partners rather than pieces. He stepped closer to Thornfield. You're right that 12 years of tyranny can't be erased by 3 months of trying. You're right that my legacy is fear and control. But you're wrong if you think people can't change. Wrong if you think growth is impossible. Wrong if you think the man I was has to be the man I remain. Prove it, Thornfield said. Prove you've actually changed. How? By accepting consequences without fighting them. By submitting to judgment even when it's unfavorable. By showing that you value justice more than power. Roderic looked at the judges, at the assembled nobles, at Seraphine watching from the gallery, then back at Thornfield. If this tribunal finds me guilty of systematic tyranny, I will abdicate immediately. I will surrender all claims to the duchy. I will accept whatever additional penalties you impose. No appeals, no resistance, complete submission to your judgment. The room erupted again, because this was unprecedented. Dukes didn't abdicate voluntarily, didn't surrender power peacefully, didn't submit to judgment from their own nobles. But Roderic meant every word, because Seraphine was right. Real strength wasn't the power to dominate. It was the courage to face consequences, to trust that truth mattered more than winning, terrifying, revolutionary, absolutely necessary. Lord Ashton called for order. The room settled slowly. Very well, the Chief Judge said. We will deliberate. Duke Vayne, you will await our judgment. Roderic bowed, walked to the side chamber they'd designated for him. Seraphine met him there. That was either brilliant or suicidal, she said. Probably both. Are you okay? Ask me after the verdict. She took his hands. Whatever they decide, you did the right thing. Did I? Or did I just hand my enemies everything they wanted? You showed them who you're trying to become. That's worth more than keeping power through fear. I hope you're right. They sat together, waiting, hours stretching into eternity. Finally, the summons came. The tribunal had reached a verdict. What? The Great Hall was packed. Every representative, every noble with access. Everyone wanted to witness history. The Duke of Blackthorn Vale on trial, facing judgment, potentially losing everything. Roderic entered. Seraphine beside him now. Because whatever happened, they faced it together. Lord Ashton stood. Duke Roderic Vayne. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence presented, has examined 12 years of governance decisions, has deliberated extensively on the charges of systematic tyranny. The room held its breath. We find the charges to be accurate, in fact. Your governance has relied heavily on fear. Your decisions have prioritized stability over compassion. Your methods have been, at times, excessive and cruel. Roderic felt the floor drop out from under him. This was it. Guilty verdict. Forced abdication. Everything gone. He'd known it was possible, likely even, but hearing it still hit like a physical blow. However, Lord Ashton continued, we also find significant context that complicates simple judgment. The duchy you inherited was genuinely unstable. The threats you faced were real. The choices available were limited. He paused. More significantly, we find evidence of genuine change over the past 3 months. The Duchess's infrastructure initiatives, your inclusion of her in governance, your willingness to approve projects you previously would have rejected, and most notably, your submission to this tribunal rather than defending through force. The old judge looked directly at Roderic. Power corrupts. That's not philosophy, it's observed fact. But what's less observed is power's capacity for evolution, for leaders to recognize their own failures and choose growth over entrenchment. Another pause. Longer. The tension unbearable. Therefore, this tribunal finds you guilty of past tyranny, but capable of future reform. Our verdict is conditional continued rule. The room exploded. Roderic stood frozen, unable to process. Conditional continued rule meant he kept the duchy, kept the title, kept everything, with conditions. Lord Ashton raised his hand. Silence fell. The conditions are as follows. First, establishment of a formal noble council with actual authority to challenge ducal decisions. No more intimidation. No more yes men. Real oversight. Acceptable. Second, annual public accounting of all major governance decisions. Full transparency. If questioned, you must provide justification. Acceptable. Third, and most important, the Duchess becomes co-ruler with equal authority. All major decisions require her consent. She serves as check on your power and voice for the people. Roderic looked at Seraphine. She looked back, surprised, uncertain. He turned to the judges. More than acceptable. She's already been saving the duchy while I was focused on control. Formalizing her authority is long overdue. Seraphine's eyes went wide. Then it's settled, Lord Ashton said. Duke Roderic Vayne, you will continue as Duke of Blackthorn Vale under these conditions. Violate them, and this tribunal reconvenes with abdication as the only option. Do you accept these terms? I accept. The relief was overwhelming, physical, like breathing after drowning. He'd kept the duchy, kept his position. But more importantly, he'd proven Thornfield wrong, proven change was possible, proven that submission to justice was strength, not weakness. Thornfield stood, walked to Roderic. For a moment they stood face to face, old warrior and evolving duke. Then Thornfield extended his hand. Don't make me regret this, he said quietly. I won't. I promise you, I won't. They shook. Firm, final, a grudge decades old beginning to heal. The tribunal dissolved. Representatives filed out, some satisfied, some disappointed, all of them having witnessed something unprecedented. Roderic and Seraphine stood alone in the great hall. Co-ruler, she said, equal authority. You're okay with that? More than okay. You've been co-ruling in everything but name for months. This just makes it official. I don't know the first thing about formal governance. You know the most important thing. You know how to see people as humans instead of tools. I'll teach you the technical aspects. You teach me the humanity. We'll balance each other. She stepped into his arms, held him tight. I can't believe you won. I didn't win. We survived. There's a difference. What difference? Winning implies defeating opposition. We converted it, showed them change was possible. That's not victory. It's evolution. She pulled back, looked at him seriously. You understand this changes everything? No more unilateral decisions? No more ruling through fear. You have to actually collaborate now. Good. I need someone to keep me honest, to push back when I default to control, to remind me that power without purpose is hollow. I can do that. I know. That's why I love you. They kissed, long, deep, like sealing a promise that went beyond words. When they pulled apart, Seraphine smiled. So what now? Now we go home. We rebuild. We show the duchy what governance looks like when it's grounded in partnership instead of fear. That's ambitious. You keep saying that, it's still true. He took her hand. They walked out of the great hall together, equal partners, co-rulers. Two people who'd started as political transaction and become something real. The journey back to Vanehold took 2 days. Time to process, to plan, to imagine what came next. When they finally saw the castle on the horizon, Roderic felt something strange. Not the possessive ownership he'd always felt before. Not the weight of absolute responsibility. Relief. Homecoming. The sense of returning to something worth protecting not through force, but through care. The castle staff greeted them at the gates. News of the tribunal verdict had traveled fast. Everyone knew the Duke had submitted to judgment and survived. Everyone knew the Duchess was now co-ruler. The atmosphere was different, less fear, more curiosity. Like maybe, just maybe, things were changing. Mrs. Hallowell approached, her stern face cracking into something that might have been a smile. "Welcome home, your graces." The plural struck Roderic, both of them, equal. "Thank you, Mrs. Hallowell. It's good to be back. The castle has been prepared for your return. Dinner is at 8, if you wish." "Perfect." They walked through familiar corridors, past portraits of stern ancestors, past the great hall where Roderic had executed Marcus and Ashford, past all the symbols of the power structure he'd built. It all looked the same, but everything was different. Because he was different, they were different, the future was different. That night, they stood on the battlements together, looking out over Blackthorn Vale in the moonlight. 12 years, Roderic said quietly. 12 years of ruling through fear. 12 years of believing isolation was strength. All of it leading to this moment. Was it worth it? Honestly, I don't know. The stability was real. The duchy survived when it might have collapsed. But the cost was everything that makes life worth living. Connection, trust, love. He turned to face her. "You gave those back to me. Made me remember what I'd sacrificed in pursuit of control. Made me want to be better. I didn't give you anything. You chose it, chose to change, chose to risk everything for justice. That was you. It was us. You pushed. I finally listened. We changed each other." She leaned into him. "What happens now?" "Now we prove it wasn't a fluke. We build governance that values people over power. We create systems that encourage growth instead of fear. We show that strength and compassion aren't opposites. That's going to be hard. Everything worth doing is hard." They stood in silence, together, facing an uncertain future with certainty in each other. And in that moment, Duke Roderic Vayne understood something fundamental. True power was never about domination. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to choose connection over control even when every instinct screamed isolation. That was the lesson. That was the growth. That was everything he'd needed to learn and had been too terrified to accept until she forced him to face it. The cost of greatness wasn't power itself. It was the willingness to evolve beyond it, to master himself before presuming to master others. And now, standing on the battlements with Seraphine beside him, Roderic Vayne finally understood what it meant to rule. Not through fear, but through trust. Not through isolation, but through partnership. Not through force, but through the quiet strength of choosing differently when destruction was easier. Below them, Blackthorn Vale spread out in moonlight, a duchy that had survived 12 years of iron control and was about to discover what came next. Above them, stars wheeled through endless sky, indifferent to human struggles, unconcerned with power or politics. And between them, a man and woman who'd started as strangers bound by contract and become partners bound by choice. The future was unwritten, the challenges were real. The work was just beginning. But for the first time in 12 years, Roderic faced it without walls, without armor, without the crushing weight of absolute control. Just himself, flawed, trying, loved. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Seraphine's hand found his, their fingers intertwined, a simple gesture that meant more than any throne or title or demonstration of power. "Ready?" she asked. "For what?" "Whatever comes next." He smiled. Actually smiled. The expression still unfamiliar but getting easier. "With you?" "Always." They turned away from the battlements, walked back into the castle, into their future. Into the work of rebuilding not just a duchy, but themselves. Behind them, the night settled over Blackthorn Vale, peaceful, quiet, full of possibility, and in the distance, morning was already waiting, ready to test everything they'd learned, ready to see if change was permanent or temporary, ready to discover what kind of rulers they'd become. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, they had each other, had survived the impossible, had proven that growth was possible even in the most hardened hearts, that love could crack fortress walls, that vulnerability could be strength, that choosing someone, truly choosing them, was the bravest thing a person could do. Duke Roderic Vayne had spent 12 years learning how to rule. Now he was learning how to live. And with Seraphine beside him, that felt like victory enough. The Iron Duke of Blackthorn Vale was gone, replaced by something more complicated, more human, more real. A man who'd learned that the greatest power wasn't the ability to control everything. It was the courage to let go of control and trust that what remained was worth more than what was surrendered. That lesson had nearly destroyed him to learn. But standing here now, with Seraphine's hand in his, and the future spreading out before them uncertain but shared, Roderic understood it had been worth every painful step. Because this, partnership, equality, love, this was what he'd been missing while he was busy being invincible. This was what made life worth living. This was everything. And finally, after 12 years of isolation and 3 months of painful growth and 1 week of terrifying judgment, Duke Roderic Vayne was ready to embrace it. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was the only certainty he needed. The only power that mattered. The only thing worth ruling for. Not fear, not controls, not dominance, but this. Always this. Together.